The night was silent, but the air carried a weight, as if history itself were holding its breath. In the heart of a forgotten valley, long abandoned by maps and men alike, lay a collection of ancient scrolls, their edges curled and blackened by centuries of neglect. Scholars had stumbled upon them by accident, hidden beneath layers of dust in a private library that had escaped the scrutiny of emperors and revolution alike. The moment their fingers brushed the brittle parchment, a chill ran down their spines. The inked symbols hinted at a civilization that should not exist, at an empire that, according to every known history, had never walked the earth. These were no ordinary records. The writings spoke of rulers whose names were absent from any official dynastic list, cities whose grandeur rivaled even the most celebrated capitals, and armies that moved with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. One scroll described an emperor who commanded both fear and devotion, whose ambition was so vast that it reached into the heavens themselves. Dragons, they claimed, were not mere myth but symbols intertwined with the state's very survival, guardians, perhaps, of secrets that humanity was not yet ready to comprehend. It was easy to dismiss such claims as legend, the fantasies of men eager to romanticize the past. Yet the details were intricate, almost obsessively so. Every description of the empire's festivals, its palaces, and its hidden cities contained anomalies, measurements that matched no known units, references to rivers and mountains that did not exist on any modern map. Even more unsettling were the personal accounts embedded within the text, written by those who claimed to have seen the emperor, to have heard the dragon roars echoing over the hills. Their words carried urgency and fear, as if they had lived through events too dangerous, too incomprehensible to be safely recorded elsewhere. Outside, the wind howled over crumbling stone and barren landscapes, and one could almost imagine the ghosts of the empire stirring in the darkness. These were stories erased from official memory, wiped from archives, and denied in every academic discourse. And yet, in these fragile scrolls, the empire whispered again. Its existence was a puzzle, a riddle that defied the logic of history. How could something so immense, so meticulously organized, vanish without a trace? How could an entire civilization be erased as if it had never been, leaving only shadows and rumors? The more the scholars read, the more they realized the danger of their discovery. Knowledge, they understood, was not always neutral. It carried weight, the power to disrupt the accepted order of understanding. Each paragraph hinted at secrets that might destabilize everything known about China's past. The notion of an empire so advanced, so ambitious, yet deliberately hidden, challenged the very foundations of history itself. And somewhere between the smudged ink and the charred edges, a question took root, a quiet but insistent whisper. What had been so extraordinary, so threatening, that history's guardians had conspired to remove it entirely from the world's memory? Night turned into dawn, yet no sun could illuminate the truth. Every revelation seemed to deepen the mystery. Every detail only tangled the threads further. The empire existed somewhere between myth and reality, a phantom in the annals of time. Its people, its cities, and its secrets waited silently beneath layers of dust and silence, daring anyone to uncover what had been lost. And in that tension, the pull between disbelief and fascination, the story began. A story not just of power and ambition, but of erasure, obsession, and the fragility of memory itself. By the time the scholars carefully returned the scrolls to their protective boxes, the first light of morning was spilling over the hills, illuminating stones that had borne witness to centuries of secrecy. Yet the feeling persisted. Something monumental had happened here, something deliberately hidden, something that challenged the way history had been written. And the question remained, hovering like a shadow in the mind. What if the most powerful empire in China had existed and had been removed from history not by time, but by intention? Mist hung low over the mountains and rivers, curling around jagged peaks like a living thing. In the tales passed down through fragmented scrolls and whispered in the dark corners of villages, dragons were not merely creatures of myth. They were the very essence of the empire itself, guardians and symbols of a power that seemed almost impossible. Some accounts described them as enormous beasts, their scales shimmering like polished bronze in the sunlight, their eyes burning with intelligence and fury. Others hinted at something more symbolic, dragons that existed in the mind and spirit, creatures of ritual and belief that commanded obedience, loyalty, and fear. To the people of this empire, dragons were intertwined with every aspect of life. The emperor himself claimed descent from them, or at least claimed their favor. Festivals erupted in flame and smoke, with elaborate dances mimicking the sinuous movements of these legendary beasts. Scrolls described how the citizens would leave offerings along riverbanks, believing the dragons guided the flow of water, the fertility of crops, and the fortune of the empire. Some scholars have suggested these rituals were political, a way to consolidate power and unify people under a common, almost mystical authority. But the surviving texts hint at something far more profound, almost religious in its intensity, a belief that the fate of the empire itself was bound to these creatures. Yet dragons were also fearsome. Stories speak of entire villages struck silent by their roar, of armies routed by the mere suggestion of their presence. Traders returning from the northern provinces whispered of shadows gliding over mountains, of fires burning in patterns too deliberate to be natural, as if the dragons themselves were judging the loyalty of the people. One particularly chilling account, found in a scorched manuscript, tells of a commander who defied the emperor, only to find his soldiers terrified by the imagined approach of dragons. Panic consumed him, and he vanished without a trace. Whether real or a powerful illusion, dragons had become the ultimate instrument of control. Historians have long debated whether these accounts were literal or metaphorical. Were dragons real creatures bred in secret laboratories or hidden valleys, now lost to time? Or were they elaborate tools of propaganda, symbolic entities designed to instill awe and fear? The texts themselves refuse to answer clearly. Every line balances between legend and observation, leaving readers suspended between wonder and doubt. Even the most skeptical scholars cannot deny the consistency and fervor with which the empire's people spoke of dragons. They were omnipresent in art, ritual, and governance. Their image adorned thrones, walls, and coins. To question the dragons was to question the very legitimacy of the emperor. And yet, for all their power, dragons seem to vanish from the records as abruptly as the empire itself. There are no remnants, no bones, no ruins that confirm their existence. Only echoes remain, fragments of legends, patterns in ancient artwork, cryptic references in scrolls half erased by time. It is as if someone or something deliberately sought to remove every trace of their presence, leaving behind only shadows and speculation. These omissions are not accidental. They speak of a deliberate erasure, a collective forgetting orchestrated over centuries. The allure of dragons lies not just in their mystery but in what they reveal about human ambition and belief. They embody the empire's desire to command awe, to manipulate perception, and to intertwine myth with power. In their duality, both guardian and terror, they encapsulate the tension at the heart of the forgotten empire, a civilization striving for greatness while teetering on the brink of destruction. The dragons were more than symbols. They were the threads connecting ruler, citizen, and destiny. And when those threads snapped, the empire itself began to unravel. By twilight, when the sun dipped behind the mountains and shadows lengthened across the land, one could almost hear the dragon's roars in the wind, carried across valleys and rivers. The empire's mythic power, entwined with fear and reverence, lingered like a ghost, a reminder that some forces, whether real or imagined, can shape entire civilizations. And as the night deepened, a single haunting question remained. If dragons were not mere legend, what had they seen, and what had they done, to vanish so completely along with the empire they guarded? In the fragmented scrolls, his name appeared only fleetingly, written in delicate brushstrokes that seemed almost hesitant, as if the scribe feared invoking him aloud. Yet even in these fragmented accounts, the emperor's presence was overwhelming, an invisible force shaping the empire's destiny and, eventually, its undoing. He was a man cloaked in paradox, both visionary and tyrant, revered for wisdom yet feared for cruelty. His ambition knew no limits, his mind a labyrinth of strategies and desires that few could hope to comprehend. To his subjects, he was a godlike figure, part mortal, part something else entirely, a ruler whose very existence seemed entwined with myth. Legends claim he was obsessed with immortality, devoting years to deciphering ancient alchemical texts, experimenting with substances meant to extend life or unlock hidden powers. Some accounts suggest that he believed dragons themselves could guide him to eternal existence, that through secret rituals he could merge human ingenuity with the supernatural. Scholars examining these descriptions often struggle to separate fact from delusion. Was this a ruler pursuing scientific advancement, or a man seduced by the dangerous allure of hubris? Perhaps the answer is both. The emperor's court was a theater of contradictions. Courtiers described him as magnetic, capable of inspiring loyalty and devotion in men who had no reason to obey him. Yet those who displeased him vanished quietly, erased not only from the court but from memory itself. One scroll tells of a high minister who opposed a minor policy, only to be found dead under circumstances that remain unexplained. Another account speaks of a general, brilliant in strategy, who vanished along with his regiment, leaving no trace, as if the empire itself had claimed them. Fear was as much a tool of governance as law or decree, and the emperor wielded it with terrifying precision. Even the construction of his cities reflected his obsession with control and symbolism. Palaces rose in impossible designs, gardens and waterways crafted to mirror celestial alignments. Streets and canals were aligned with mythical constellations, and enormous statues of dragons loomed over plazas, their eyes carved to catch the first and last light of day. Every corner of his empire was a message, a declaration of power and a warning to those who might defy him. To walk through his cities was to feel the pulse of ambition, the heartbeat of an empire that seemed destined for greatness yet carried within it the seeds of destruction. Yet, for all his brilliance, the emperor was a figure shrouded in contradictions. Some records suggest he possessed a deep empathy for his people, commissioning grand works of art and public spaces, promoting scholars, and attempting to codify laws that would ensure prosperity. Other accounts portray him as merciless, willing to sacrifice thousands in experiments or military campaigns, a ruler for whom the end, immortality, power, or the perfection of his empire always justified the means. The contrast is jarring, and perhaps intentionally so. History remembers him inconsistently because the empire that bore his vision was itself inconsistent, caught between legend and reality. As decades passed, the emperor's obsession intensified. Scrolls speak of nights spent in solitary meditation, surrounded by alchemical instruments and manuscripts, whispering to unseen forces and dragons alike. Some accounts claim he grew increasingly paranoid, convinced that rival kingdoms were conspiring against him, that even his closest advisors plotted his downfall. He began to isolate himself, leaving the administration in the hands of ministers whose loyalty was bought with fear rather than respect. His vision of immortality became entwined with a vision of absolute dominion, a dream of a perfect empire that could never age, never falter, and never be questioned. And yet, despite, or perhaps because of his brilliance, the emperor left behind almost no verifiable evidence of his reign. Cities were obliterated, records erased, and monuments dismantled. The absence of his name in official histories is chilling, a silence that speaks as loudly as any inscription. What force could have been powerful enough to remove an emperor from history, along with the empire he built? Some suggest internal betrayal, others a combination of natural catastrophe and political machination. The truth, as always, is murky, leaving only tantalizing fragments and ghostly shadows. In the quietest hours of the night, one can almost imagine him still walking the corridors of his vanished palaces, contemplating dragons and immortality, the flickering light of torches reflecting in his eyes. He was a man who reached too far, who dreamed too audaciously, and perhaps paid the ultimate price for it. And as we peer into the remnants of his world, the burned scrolls, the eroded foundations, the myths carried forward in whispers, the question lingers. How can one man's ambition be so vast, so consuming, that it threatens to erase an entire civilization from memory? Maps are meant to guide us, to chart the world in neat lines and measured distances. Yet some maps lie, not by accident but by design. In dusty archives and forgotten libraries, a handful of charts survive that depict a China unlike any recorded in history books. Rivers snake across the landscape in courses unknown to modern geographers. Cities rise where only wilderness should exist, and mountain ranges bend in impossible configurations. These were not crude sketches by unskilled cartographers. The detail is meticulous, precise, almost obsessive. Each line seems to whisper a secret, a message encoded for those brave or curious enough to follow it. The anomalies are striking. Entire provinces appear on some maps and vanish from others. Trade routes connect cities that no one has ever found. Even the most experienced historians and archaeologists are forced to pause, the certainty of their knowledge shaking under the weight of these discrepancies. Were these cities real once, only to be swallowed by time or catastrophe? Or had someone gone to extraordinary lengths to erase them, bending memory itself into obedience? Some scholars suggest that if we could overlay these ancient maps with modern satellite imaging, we might uncover traces of hidden rivers, buried roads, or foundations long since swallowed by the earth. There is an almost supernatural quality to the precision of these charts. In one, a city is drawn with streets radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel, aligned to the cardinal points with uncanny accuracy. Temples and palaces are placed with geometrical exactness, yet the location itself is absent from any surviving records. It is as if the map's creator knew something that the world had deliberately chosen to forget, and sought to preserve it in secret. Some suggest that these maps were encoded with a message, a key to unlock the empire's mysteries, intended for those who dared to look closely enough. Yet maps alone cannot hold the story. Scholars have traced references in letters and journals from merchants, travelers, and envoys who claim to have seen cities that were never acknowledged by any dynasty. One account speaks of a grand marketplace in the northern plains, teeming with merchants and craftspeople, yet completely erased from official history. Another describes a palace adorned with golden dragons, the largest statues ever crafted, standing sentinel over streets no one else seems to know exist. When cross-referenced with the maps, a tantalizing pattern emerges. These lost cities align with natural landmarks that later dynasties ignored or denied, as if their existence posed a threat to the narrative of history itself. There are even hints of political motivation behind the omissions. Ancient bureaucrats, threatened by the emperor's ambition, may have deliberately removed cities from official maps after his fall. By erasing the locations of strongholds, archives, and palaces, they could undermine any attempt to recall the empire's power. The result is a historical void so complete that later generations could only speculate, filling the gaps with myths, legends, and whispered tales of dragons and lost civilizations. Each erased city, each missing province, is a silent testimony to the lengths to which memory itself can be controlled. Walking across the regions suggested by these maps today, one notices subtle signs: terraces carved into hillsides, irrigation channels leading nowhere, fragments of walls and foundations buried under centuries of soil. Even nature seems to resist complete concealment, offering glimpses of what was once there. It is a haunting thought. What if the empire's erasure was not only political but deliberate, a calculated effort to remove its presence from consciousness itself? And yet, through the maps, the traces remain, like faint echoes of a song almost forgotten but still capable of stirring awe and fear. The beauty of these maps lies not only in what they depict, but in the questions they raise. They force us to confront the possibility that history, as we know it, is incomplete, that civilizations may rise and fall in secrecy, their stories hidden behind layers of deceit and silence. They remind us that even the most objective records can be manipulated, and that the world we see on paper is often only a shadow of what once existed. In these maps, the forgotten empire whispers still, daring those who study it to trace its rivers, walk its streets, and imagine the cities that vanished as if they had never been. As night falls over the mountains and rivers that once cradled this empire, the maps take on an almost magical quality. Lines drawn centuries ago glow in the mind's eye, revealing paths to cities that never existed according to history, yet perhaps existed according to memory, legend, and secret records. And in the silence of archives and laboratories, one cannot help but wonder. How many more corners of the world remain hidden in plain sight, erased not by nature, but by human ambition and fear? These maps do more than chart a forgotten empire. They dare us to question everything we think we know. Behind walls that had not felt the warmth of sunlight for centuries, hidden beneath layers of dust and the weight of forgotten history, lay the empire's most guarded secrets. The so-called forbidden archives were said to hold knowledge too dangerous, too powerful, or too destabilizing for common eyes. Scholars who stumbled upon hints of their existence often described a palpable tension in the air, as if the archives themselves recognized intruders and hesitated, measuring the worthiness of those who dared approach. The path to these archives was treacherous. Narrow corridors lined with crumbling bookshelves, staircases that groaned underfoot, and locked chambers sealed with mechanisms so complex that many assumed they were magical rather than mechanical. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating yet electrifying, a mix of musty parchment and the faint tang of metals used in binding scrolls. Scrolls lay in precarious piles, some charred or singed at the edges, others meticulously preserved with silk and lacquer. Each one whispered fragments of a civilization that defied logic. Descriptions of cities with impossible architecture, ritual practices that combined science and superstition, and accounts of rulers who wielded power with both wisdom and terror. Even the most mundane administrative records hinted at extraordinary sophistication, trade networks that spanned mountains and rivers unknown to modern geographers, census data so detailed it suggested an almost omniscient bureaucracy, and engineering plans for structures that could have rivaled the most advanced civilizations of their era. But it was not just the content that captivated and unnerved. The scrolls themselves seemed alive with intention, the ink and symbols radiating a meticulous care that hinted at secret meaning. Some texts were coded in ciphers that scholars have yet to fully decode, containing instructions, warnings, or perhaps knowledge considered too dangerous to reveal. The very act of reading felt like peering into the mind of the emperor, into the obsessive, brilliant, and often terrifying intelligence that had sought to craft an empire unlike any other. One could not help but feel the weight of the human ambition that had produced these records, a desire not only to rule but to shape reality itself, to defy mortality and memory. Among the most disturbing items were accounts of experiments, scientific, alchemical, and spiritual, that seemed to straddle the line between genius and madness. There were detailed descriptions of substances believed to grant life, of rituals meant to harness cosmic energy, and of creatures, perhaps dragons, whose very existence had been recorded as both miraculous and terrifying. Some of these records suggested that failures were not mere mistakes but deliberate sacrifices, necessary to achieve a higher, hidden goal. The implications were chilling. Knowledge powerful enough to alter society, to challenge kings, to bend nature, had been contained and then hidden away for centuries, leaving behind only whispers and fragments. Even more unnerving were the personal accounts of those who worked within the archives themselves. One scribe wrote of nights spent transcribing records by candlelight, feeling the weight of unseen eyes and hearing faint, unexplainable noises echoing through the corridors. Another chronicler described discovering scrolls so detailed that they seemed predictive, as if the emperor could foresee the consequences of his actions decades, even centuries, into the future. A recurring motif in these writings was fear, the recognition that knowledge without caution could destroy both the seeker and the world they inhabited. And yet, despite the danger, the archives revealed glimpses of humanity in the empire, dreams of perfection, of beauty, of harmony between the natural and the supernatural. They captured moments of joy, triumph, and artistry alongside accounts of cruelty, obsession, and devastation. It was as if the empire's soul had been encoded into these texts, each scroll a fragment of a consciousness that once shaped rivers, cities, and lives. Holding a scroll, one could almost feel the pulse of the empire itself, a heartbeat now silent but echoing faintly through time. Perhaps the most haunting element of the forbidden archives was the sense of deliberate erasure. Many scrolls were partially burned, deliberately defaced, or hidden so deeply that only the most persistent could uncover them. Why would a civilization hide its greatest achievements and darkest secrets? Theories abound. Fear of misuse, political intrigue, or the very ambition of the emperor, who may have intended that only the worthy survive to inherit his vision. What remains undeniable is that the archives, in their silence and secrecy, hold the threads necessary to reconstruct a world that was deliberately erased. As the last rays of daylight filtered through narrow cracks in the stone walls, illuminating the curled edges of ancient manuscripts, a profound sense of awe settled over the room. Every scroll, every symbol, every fragment of paper was a bridge across centuries, connecting the present to a past both fantastical and terrifying. And in that silence, a question lingers like a whisper. What knowledge was so dangerous that an entire empire sought to protect it from history itself? And what might we uncover if we dared to look closer? In the heart of the empire, away from the eyes of ordinary citizens and hidden deep within labyrinthine chambers of the palace, the emperor pursued his most audacious obsession: alchemy. It was said he believed the key to immortality lay not in conquest, wealth, or even wisdom, but in the secret combination of elements, rituals, and the unseen forces of the universe. Scholars who later glimpsed fragments of his alchemical texts were struck by the complexity and audacity of his designs. He sought to merge science and sorcery, blending metallurgy, chemistry, astronomy, and ritual into experiments that challenged the boundaries of human understanding. The emperor's alchemists were elite, handpicked for brilliance and loyalty, and they lived in both awe and fear of their master. Scrolls describe laboratories filled with metals that glowed unnaturally, substances that steamed and hissed with a life of their own, and intricate devices whose purposes remain largely indecipherable. The air within these chambers was heavy with the scent of sulfur and unknown compounds, and some accounts suggest that experiments were conducted in complete darkness, illuminated only by the flickering light of enchanted lanterns. The work was dangerous, even lethal, and many assistants vanished or were injured, their fates recorded only as warnings scrawled in the margins of surviving manuscripts. Dragons were central to this alchemy, both as symbols and perhaps as literal participants in the emperor's vision. Some texts imply that the creatures were considered conduits of energy, their essence harnessed in rituals to extend life and imbue rulers with power beyond mortal limits. Artists and scribes were commissioned to document dragons in meticulous detail, and these images were later used in the experimental chambers, integrated into the designs of intricate devices meant to emulate their supposed abilities. The symbolism was as precise as it was terrifying. Dragons represented dominion over both nature and the unseen, a force the emperor hoped to capture and wield for himself. The alchemical experiments were not purely symbolic. Scrolls hint at the creation of substances that could enhance physical strength, sharpen the mind, or prolong life. Some passages describe liquids that shimmered with an inner light, powders that could ignite spontaneously, and metals that could sing when struck. Yet alongside these marvels were records of catastrophe. Fires that consumed entire laboratories, chemical reactions that left assistants lifeless, and mysterious illnesses that no physician could cure. The emperor's pursuit of immortality was thus entwined with obsession, danger, and the sacrifice of human life. It is difficult to determine how much of the emperor's alchemy was literal and how much allegorical. Scholars debate whether dragons were ever part of the experiments in a tangible sense or if they were employed purely as symbols of energy and power. But the texts leave no doubt that the work was real, dangerous, and intended to push the empire beyond ordinary limits. Each experiment, meticulously recorded, reflects a civilization that dared to challenge nature itself, to blur the line between the possible and the impossible. Beyond the laboratories, the emperor's obsession with immortality permeated the empire. Massive temples were constructed to honor the dragons, festivals celebrated their supposed power, and the people were subtly indoctrinated into rituals meant to channel cosmic energy toward the ruler. Even military campaigns were framed as offerings, battles fought to appease the unseen forces that the emperor believed governed life and death. The pursuit of immortality was no private indulgence. It was woven into the very fabric of the empire, touching the lives of thousands who may not have understood the true cost of their ruler's obsession. The more the emperor delved into alchemy, the more isolated he became. Accounts describe nights spent in solitary meditation, conducting experiments that combined science, ritual, and mysticism, speaking to dragons as though they were present. His obsession consumed him entirely, and some historians speculate that it accelerated the empire's decline. Mistakes or miscalculations in alchemy could have led to fires, poisoning, or structural damage, while the diversion of resources and attention may have left the empire vulnerable to political intrigue and natural catastrophe. Yet, in these shadows of danger and obsession, there was also genius. The emperor's alchemical pursuits hinted at knowledge centuries ahead of their time. Early chemistry, experimental processes, even proto-engineering feats that remain difficult to replicate. It is no wonder that later rulers sought to erase all traces of his work. It was simultaneously wondrous and terrifying, capable of elevating humanity or destroying it. And through it all, the emperor's dragons, whether real, symbolic, or both, loomed over the empire as guardians, instruments, and witnesses to the empire's audacious reach toward immortality. As night fell over the palace, the flickering glow of chemical reactions illuminated statues of dragons, their eyes reflecting fire and shadow. The emperor, alone amidst his creations, may have believed he was touching the eternal, bending the laws of nature to his will. Yet the manuscripts that survived suggest a chilling reality. Ambition of this magnitude is rarely without consequence. In the silence that followed, the empire itself seemed to tremble, caught between the brilliance of discovery and the perilous edge of obsession. And from these hidden chambers, one question emerges with almost unbearable weight. What was sacrificed in the pursuit of immortality, and could such ambition have sown the seeds of an empire's disappearance? Beneath layers of earth and centuries of neglect, the remnants of cities once magnificent lay hidden, their grandeur almost impossible to imagine. Travelers in distant lands spoke of ruined palaces and abandoned streets swallowed by sand and soil, but official records made no mention of them. Archaeologists who began uncovering these fragments often felt as though they were trespassing on the empire itself, piecing together a civilization that history had chosen to forget. Foundations of enormous buildings, long-buried canals, and intricate roadways emerged from the earth like whispers of a world that should not exist, each clue suggesting an urban sophistication far beyond what contemporary dynasties could achieve. These lost cities were not random settlements but meticulously designed metropolises, aligned with rivers, mountains, and celestial patterns. Palaces sat at the center of each city, commanding not only space but symbolism, spatial hierarchies that mirrored the empire's ideology and belief systems. The streets were paved in intricate mosaics, some of which depicted dragons in motion, as if to guide travelers or perhaps remind citizens of the unseen power that ruled over them. Markets and courtyards were carefully laid out, evidence of thriving trade networks, while public buildings suggested a society that valued administration, culture, and ceremony in equal measure. Every city was a statement of ambition, a manifestation of the emperor's vision rendered in stone and earth. Archaeological teams uncovered artifacts that spoke of both everyday life and extraordinary innovation. Tools and pottery bore inscriptions that hinted at literacy rates far higher than previously assumed for the region. Canals and irrigation systems demonstrated advanced engineering, capable of sustaining large populations in areas otherwise considered marginal. Even fragments of manuscripts hinted at knowledge of medicine, astronomy, and metallurgy that seemed centuries ahead of their time. These discoveries forced researchers to confront a startling possibility. The empire may have achieved a level of sophistication rivaling or exceeding that of better documented dynasties, yet vanished without leaving the expected imprint on history. Yet the cities were incomplete stories, fragmented and enigmatic. Entire districts had been destroyed, either by deliberate human action or natural catastrophe, leaving behind a landscape of mystery. In some areas, streets ended abruptly, canals flowed into nothingness, and walls collapsed in unnatural patterns, suggesting intentional erasure. Could this have been a result of war, betrayal, or a more calculated attempt to remove all evidence of the empire's existence? The lack of consistent records only deepened the mystery, turning every ruin into a puzzle piece in a history that refused to be reconstructed with certainty. Villagers living near these archaeological sites told stories that further blurred the line between legend and reality. They spoke of underground passageways that led to vast chambers, of hidden treasures left behind by fleeing inhabitants, and of strange sounds that seemed to emanate from beneath the soil at night. Some claimed that dragons once roamed the skies over these cities, protecting their secrets or punishing the disloyal. Scholars often dismiss such accounts as folklore, yet when paired with the physical remnants of the cities and corroborated by the strange anomalies in ancient maps, a tantalizing picture emerges. A civilization both real and extraordinary, whose disappearance remains inexplicable. The most haunting aspect of these cities is the sense of deliberate concealment. Entire sections appear to have been buried or abandoned intentionally, as if the empire itself wished to vanish without a trace. Archaeologists unearthed foundations cut off mid-construction, artifacts placed in hidden chambers, and inscriptions that seem to warn future generations not to tamper with certain sites. This raises chilling questions. Who would have orchestrated such erasure, and for what purpose? Was it the emperor himself, obsessed with secrecy and immortality, or later powers seeking to rewrite history and suppress knowledge of what had been achieved? As sunlight filters across the buried streets and collapsed buildings, the scale of ambition becomes clear. These were not mere settlements, they were statements of power, philosophy, and art. And yet, despite the sophistication and grandeur, nature and time conspired to hide them from view. Overgrown terraces, eroded walls, and shifting sands are now the only witnesses to the empire's brilliance. Archaeologists often describe a sense of awe tinged with unease when exploring these sites, as if they are walking through a civilization's final breaths, hearing echoes of a world deliberately removed from memory. The cities beneath the sand are more than archaeological curiosity. They are a testament to what humanity can create and what it can lose. They challenge assumptions about history, about the linear progression of civilizations, and about the permanence of memory. Each street, each canal, each foundation is a reminder that an empire, no matter how grand, can be erased not just from power but from the very consciousness of the world. And as the wind sweeps across these lost landscapes, carrying the faint scent of dust and ancient stone, one cannot help but ask, how many other empires, forgotten or hidden, wait silently beneath the earth, daring us to uncover their secrets before they fade entirely into shadow? Even as cities crumbled and scrolls turned to dust, whispers of the empire survived in the voices of those who had witnessed it firsthand, or claimed to have. Oral histories, passed down through generations in villages far from the emperor's capital, speak of wonders and terrors alike. These stories were never meant to be written. They were carried in memory, in song, and in ritual. Elders recounted nights when the sky seemed to burn with unnatural light, of dragons gliding silently over fields, and of distant bells echoing from palaces no one dared approach. While outsiders might dismiss these tales as exaggeration or superstition, they hold a rhythm, a consistency, that suggests something extraordinary once existed. The oral histories are fragmented but strikingly detailed. Some villagers spoke of markets bustling with goods from lands unknown, of scholars debating philosophy under lanterns that glowed without flame, and of a ruler whose presence alone could command both loyalty and terror. Others recounted the darker side, the sudden disappearances of those who spoke out of turn, the secretive rituals conducted in the dead of night, and the fear that the emperor's ambition extended into the very soul of his subjects. What emerges from these accounts is a civilization alive with human contradictions. Creativity and obsession, beauty and cruelty, devotion and dread. One recurring theme is the presence of dragons, not only as mythical creatures but as tangible, living symbols of the emperor's power. Villagers described how dragons were said to appear at moments of both triumph and punishment, guarding treasures, guiding travelers, or instilling fear in those deemed disloyal. Some stories hinted at an almost symbiotic relationship between dragons and humans. The creatures reflected the will of the emperor, yet they also served as guardians of knowledge and power that could not be entrusted to ordinary mortals. Scholars studying these oral traditions often note that, even when details differ, the emotional resonance remains consistent. Dragons were awe-inspiring, terrifying, and central to the identity of the empire. The oral histories also provide insight into the empire's collapse. While written records remain scarce, villagers told of sudden evacuations, of entire districts abandoned overnight, and of fires that consumed palaces and libraries. They spoke of shadows moving through the streets, of soldiers and citizens disappearing into the night, and of a silence that fell over the land, as if the world itself had conspired to forget the empire. These accounts, passed from mouth to ear, preserve a sense of immediacy and emotional truth often absent from official records. Through them, the empire's human story, its fears, triumphs, and tragedies, remains alive, even as its cities lie buried and its scrolls decay. The consistency of these oral traditions is particularly striking given the centuries that separate them from the empire's existence. Scholars have noted patterns. Certain festivals, songs, and rituals performed in remote villages bear uncanny resemblance to descriptions found in the fragments of the emperor's scrolls. These cultural echoes suggest that the empire's influence persisted, not in grand monuments or written records, but in memory itself, encoded in the rhythms, words, and practices of ordinary people. Even where written evidence has vanished, these oral histories act as a bridge, connecting the present to a civilization deliberately erased from conventional history. Yet the oral histories are also incomplete, fragmented, and often contradictory. One village might remember the emperor as a wise and compassionate leader, another as a tyrant who sacrificed thousands in pursuit of immortality. Some accounts describe dragons as benevolent protectors, while others portray them as instruments of terror. It is precisely this ambiguity that makes the stories so compelling. They resist simple categorization and force us to confront the possibility that the empire, like its dragons, existed on a plane between reality and myth, shaped as much by imagination as by fact. Perhaps the most haunting element of these oral histories is their insistence on secrecy. Many of the accounts include warnings passed down through generations. Do not speak of what you have seen, do not follow the paths of the lost cities, and never attempt to uncover what was hidden. The empire, even in its absence, seems to have cast a shadow over memory itself, compelling caution, respect, and fear. And yet, despite the warnings, the voices persist, drawing the curious closer to truths long denied, daring them to reconcile legend and history, myth and reality. In the fading light of day, one can almost hear these stories whispering across valleys and hills, carried by wind and memory alike. They remind us that civilizations are more than the structures they leave behind, more than the records that survive. They exist in the hearts and minds of those who live under their shadow. And in these surviving voices, a delicate but unbroken thread connects us to the empire's lost world, offering glimpses of wonder, terror, and ambition that cannot be fully explained, yet demand to be understood. Beneath the grandeur of palaces, the brilliance of dragons, and the whisper of lost cities, a darker current ran through the empire: politics. Power was never absolute, and even the most brilliant ruler is vulnerable to betrayal. Scrolls and oral histories alike speak of ministers, generals, and advisors whose ambitions rivaled the emperor's own. Some sought to align themselves with dragons, others with foreign powers, and a few simply craved dominion over those who had once been loyal. Intrigue simmered beneath the surface, a hidden war of loyalty and deception that threatened to unravel the empire from within. The emperor, despite his brilliance, was not blind to these dangers. He surrounded himself with spies, loyalists, and alchemists who were as much political tools as scholars. He created a network of secret channels to monitor dissent, employing codes, concealed messages, and even arcane symbols to communicate with trusted allies. Those who opposed him were punished swiftly and often invisibly. Disappearances, sudden deaths, and the erasure of families were all methods to maintain control. Power in this empire was not given. It was seized, maintained, and defended through fear, cunning, and sometimes ruthless calculation. One particularly chilling account describes a conspiracy among high-ranking generals who sought to overthrow the emperor, believing that his obsession with dragons and immortality had blinded him to the empire's practical needs. The plot was discovered not by conventional intelligence but by one of the emperor's alchemists, who claimed to have received a warning in a vision, interpreted through ritual and symbolism. Those involved vanished without a trace, their names erased from every record, leaving behind only whispers and veiled threats in the margins of surviving scrolls. The precision of such retribution suggests an almost preternatural awareness, as if the empire itself, through dragons, spies, or the emperor's own insight, protected its secrets at all costs. Yet betrayal was not always external. Family members, close advisors, and even those who had once pledged loyalty could be seduced by ambition, greed, or fear. Some accounts suggest that the emperor's own lineage became a source of tension, with rivals challenging succession, disputing his visions, and undermining policies designed to preserve the empire's cohesion. Each act of treachery, whether minor or catastrophic, destabilized the delicate balance the emperor had cultivated, sowing seeds of doubt, paranoia, and eventual decay. Even the most brilliant ruler can be undone by those closest to him, and in this empire, the stakes were nothing less than survival itself. Political intrigue intertwined with the empire's obsession with immortality and dragons. Ministers who opposed the emperor's experiments found themselves facing mysterious accidents, illnesses, or the sudden loss of entire households. Generals who refused to participate in rituals were mysteriously defeated in battle. Even ordinary citizens were not immune. Stories speak of communities punished for perceived disloyalty, entire villages left abandoned, their inhabitants vanished or absorbed into secret programs overseen by alchemists. Fear became both instrument and shield, a mechanism by which the emperor maintained control over an empire teetering on the edge of its own ambition. Yet, paradoxically, these very intrigues may have contributed to the empire's erasure. When the emperor disappeared, whether by death, exile, or some other mysterious force, the power vacuum unleashed a cascade of chaos. Rival factions moved swiftly to destroy evidence, erase records, and consolidate control over surviving territories. The hidden cities were abandoned, archives burned, and maps altered. Betrayal, once a subtle current, became a flood, washing away the empire's presence and leaving only fragmented myths, scattered ruins, and the persistent legend of dragons. The speed and thoroughness of this erasure remain one of the greatest enigmas for historians, a testament to both the empire's ambition and the perils of human ambition unchecked. Even today, scholars and archaeologists struggle to piece together the empire's political landscape. Fragmented scrolls, coded messages, and oral histories provide tantalizing clues but no definitive narrative. Who betrayed whom and why? How much of the collapse was internal, and how much the result of deliberate erasure? These questions remain unanswered, yet they carry a haunting clarity. Empires are fragile, even when they seem immortal. The combination of ambition, paranoia, and betrayal can undo centuries of achievement in a single generation. The human element, the greed, fear, and desire for power, remains at the core of this empire's story. Dragons, alchemy, and architectural marvels may capture the imagination, but it is the politics, the treachery, and the silent, invisible hand of betrayal that truly shaped the empire's fate. And as one contemplates the ruins, the lost scrolls, and the oral histories that survived, it becomes impossible to ignore the shadow that lies behind every legend. Even in a civilization that reached for the heavens, human ambition and human treachery proved to be the ultimate force, capable of erasing kings, cities, and entire histories from the record of time. Even the mightiest empires are vulnerable to forces beyond human control, and the Forgotten Empire was no exception. Amid its grandeur, dragons, and alchemical marvels, natural catastrophes may have played a silent, devastating role. Scrolls and oral histories speak of unusual storms, sudden floods, and earthquakes that reshaped the landscape with terrifying speed. Some chronicles describe rivers rising overnight, swallowing fields and villages, while others recount mountains shedding landslides that buried entire districts. In an empire already teetering under political intrigue and obsessive ambition, such disasters would have been catastrophic, amplifying fear and destabilizing society at every level. One particularly chilling account details a night when fire and wind swept through the northern provinces, reducing entire cities to ash while survivors could only flee in terror. The storm was described as unnatural, almost sentient, as if the heavens themselves were reacting to the empire's audacious attempts to bend reality. Scholars have debated whether these events were natural disasters exaggerated in oral histories or perhaps the unintended consequences of alchemical experiments gone awry. If the emperor's manipulations of energy, dragons, or rare substances were real, it is conceivable that a miscalculation could have triggered catastrophic environmental effects, a literal manifestation of ambition turning against its creator. Famine and disease compounded the impact of these disasters. Crop failures, caused by disrupted irrigation systems and shifting rivers, left populations vulnerable, while illnesses spread rapidly through overcrowded cities. Some scrolls hint at secretive quarantine measures, while oral histories tell of entire communities disappearing, either forced to relocate or consumed by disease. These tragedies, when coupled with political instability and the emperor's obsession with immortality, created a perfect storm, a civilization on the brink, struggling against both human and natural forces that it could neither fully predict nor control. Yet the catastrophes were more than physical. They were symbolic, intertwining with the mythology of dragons and divine favor. Villagers recounted that dragons were often seen in the sky before major disasters, their presence interpreted as warning or judgment. Whether real or imagined, these sightings reinforced the belief that the emperor's power, and by extension, the empire itself, was intimately connected to cosmic forces. The disasters, then, were not only destructive but deeply psychological, eroding faith, spreading fear, and undermining confidence in leadership at a critical moment. Archaeological evidence supports the notion of sudden destruction. Excavations reveal layers of ash and debris, waterlogged foundations, and collapsed structures, suggesting that some cities were abandoned in haste. Streets and canals abruptly end, indicating a sudden departure or catastrophic event. While some of this destruction may have been intentional, the scale and randomness of the damage point to environmental forces that even a powerful ruler could not fully control. It is a haunting reminder that no matter how sophisticated an empire becomes, it remains vulnerable to the unpredictability of nature. The combination of disasters, disease, and political instability may explain how an empire of immense power vanished so completely. Where historians often assume gradual decline, the evidence here suggests abrupt collapse, punctuated by fear and confusion. Survivors fled, records were destroyed, and the empire's infrastructure fell into ruin. Over time, memory itself became fragmented, leaving behind myths, oral histories, and tantalizing fragments of physical evidence. Nature, history, and human ambition combined to create an almost perfect erasure, a civilization removed from memory as thoroughly as if it had never existed. And yet, even in the ruins, traces persist: foundations, canals, buried artifacts, and the echoes of dragons in songs and scrolls. These remnants remind us that disaster does not simply erase history. It reshapes it, leaving fragments that whisper of grandeur and terror alike. Scholars and explorers who confront these sites often describe a mix of awe and unease, sensing the power that once flowed through these lands, a force that was both human and extraordinary, yet ultimately fragile in the face of nature's might. The disasters also raise profound questions about ambition and hubris. Could the emperor have avoided catastrophe? Had he not sought immortality and mastery over the dragons? Were the alchemical experiments, the secretive rituals, and the manipulation of the natural world factors that intensified these disasters? We may never know with certainty, but the patterns of destruction suggest that the empire's downfall was not caused by any single event. It was a convergence of human ambition, political betrayal, and the inexorable power of the natural world. As night falls over the forgotten empire's ruined cities, one can almost hear the wind carrying echoes of fire, floods, and falling mountains. These forces, silent yet unstoppable, shaped the fate of millions and ensured that history would remember only fragments of what once was. In contemplating these disasters, a chilling truth emerges. Even the most extraordinary civilizations are fragile, their glory fleeting, and their memory as vulnerable to the forces of nature as it is to human ambition. The empire's brilliance may have reached for immortality, but it was ultimately subject to the inexorable, impartial judgment of the world itself. In the shadowed halls of palaces and hidden temples, ritual was not mere performance. It was the lifeblood of the empire. Every gesture, chant, and offering was meticulously designed to sustain the emperor's vision, to channel the power of dragons, and to maintain a fragile balance between human ambition and supernatural forces. These rituals were shrouded in secrecy, known only to priests, alchemists, and select courtiers who understood the precise timing, symbolism, and sequence required to avoid catastrophe. The air in these chambers was thick with incense, metallic tangs from alchemical reactions, and the almost imperceptible hum of energy said to rise from the sacred spaces themselves. The rituals centered on dragons, which were considered both protectors and instruments of power. Scrolls and oral histories describe ceremonies in which dragon effigies were arranged in patterns aligned with the stars, mountains, and rivers, as if the empire itself were a living map of cosmic influence. Participants wore masks and robes embroidered with symbols meant to capture celestial energy, and each movement was choreographed to reflect the emperor's will. Some rituals lasted for days, combining meditation, chanting, and chemical experiments intended to harness natural forces. Observers wrote that the experience was overwhelming, a fusion of beauty, terror, and transcendence that defied ordinary comprehension. Human sacrifice, while rare, played a role in some of these ceremonies, a chilling reminder of the empire's extremes. Victims were chosen not for cruelty alone, but for their symbolic significance. Skilled artisans, brave soldiers, or those considered spiritually attuned. The act was never perfunctory. It was believed to release energy, appease dragons, or complete the cycle of cosmic balance. Chroniclers emphasized the psychological intensity of these rituals, noting that even participants were often overcome with awe, fear, and reverence. One account describes a ritual in which a high priest collapsed mid-ceremony, claiming that he had glimpsed the essence of a dragon, a force so vast and incomprehensible that it transcended human understanding. Alchemy and ritual were inseparable. Ingredients were carefully prepared and activated through incantations, rituals timed to celestial events, and the precise positioning of dragon effigies. Some texts suggest that the emperor believed these combined practices could manipulate time, extend life, and even influence the destiny of entire provinces. The rituals were not simply symbolic. They were considered experimental, a laboratory of the soul as much as of the physical world. The line between religion, science, and magic was deliberately blurred, and participants were trained to navigate its complexities without succumbing to its dangers. The secrecy of these practices was paramount. Many rituals were conducted underground or within specially constructed chambers, inaccessible to the general populace. Knowledge was transmitted orally or encoded in ciphers and manuscripts, with failure to understand or follow instructions precisely considered a grave risk. Some accounts describe assistants who vanished during rituals, their absence never explained, possibly sacrifices, possibly accidents, possibly erased from memory as part of the empire's obsessive control over knowledge. The emperor himself often attended only portions of these ceremonies, claiming that witnessing the full power of dragons and alchemy could be overwhelming, even for him. Beyond the immediate participants, the rituals influenced the empire at large. Festivals, public offerings, and elaborate processions reflected the underlying cosmology, reinforcing the connection between dragons, the emperor, and the world itself. Citizens internalized these beliefs, consciously or subconsciously, shaping behavior, governance, and social cohesion. Even those who never witnessed a ritual firsthand were affected by the pervasive symbols, stories, and ceremonies, making the empire's ideology inseparable from everyday life. The power of belief became both a stabilizing force and a subtle form of control, allowing the emperor to align human will with his own ambitions. Yet the rituals also carried risks, both spiritual and political. Misalignment, error, or disobedience could provoke disasters, whether through chemical explosions, failed alchemical reactions, or cosmic imbalance as interpreted by the priests. Some oral histories claim that dragons themselves, as supernatural witnesses, could bring judgment upon those who acted improperly, unleashing storms, disease, or misfortune. The rituals were therefore a delicate dance between mastery and vulnerability, a high-stakes practice in which failure was not just possible but potentially catastrophic. The emotional intensity of these ceremonies cannot be overstated. Accounts describe participants entering altered states of consciousness, experiencing visions, feelings of transcendence, or terror so profound that it left lasting psychological scars. Even centuries later, villagers recount hearing echoes of chanting and footsteps in ruins that no longer exist, suggesting that the empire's rituals left a spiritual residue, a lingering imprint of power that survived both time and destruction. Ultimately, the rituals were a reflection of the empire itself, grand, meticulous, dangerous, and awe-inspiring. They embodied the intersection of human ambition, mystical belief, and the quest for immortality, revealing both the brilliance and the peril of the emperor's vision. Through them, the empire sought not only to control its people but to bend the world itself, to harness dragons, alchemy, and cosmic forces in service of a dream that may have been as unsustainable as it was magnificent. And in contemplating these hidden ceremonies, one is forced to confront a timeless question. How far would humanity go to touch the eternal, and what is the cost of reaching too far? While the empire dazzled with rituals, dragons, and architectural marvels, its survival depended on an intricate web of intelligence, secrecy, and surveillance. Beneath the visible world of palaces, markets, and streets, a hidden network of councils, informants, and operatives maintained the delicate balance of power. The emperor's reach extended into every corner of the realm, not only through fear and loyalty, but through the silent observation of a system designed to anticipate threats before they could manifest. Every decision, every movement, and every whisper of dissent was potentially noted, reported, and evaluated, a testament to the empire's obsession with control and foresight. The councils were composed of a select few, chosen not only for loyalty but for their intellect, cunning, and discretion. Their chambers were concealed behind ordinary walls, accessible only through secret doors and coded entrances. Records suggest that these councils were involved in virtually every aspect of governance, from agriculture and commerce to ritual practice and military strategy. Decisions were made with both precision and secrecy, often based on intelligence gathered by spies, informants, and even alchemical divinations. The emperor relied on this system to maintain stability, manage the ambitions of his ministers, and ensure the secrecy of his more dangerous experiments. The empire's intelligence network extended far beyond the capital. Messengers, disguised as merchants, pilgrims, or laborers, traversed the provinces, observing, reporting, and sometimes subtly manipulating events. Informants were embedded in both loyalist and rival factions, providing early warning of conspiracies, rebellion, or the mishandling of resources. Some accounts suggest that these operatives could disappear as if swallowed by the earth, only to reappear with critical information. This constant vigilance created an atmosphere of both safety and suffocating paranoia. The emperor could anticipate rebellion, but those under his eye could never act freely without risk. Even the alchemists, ritualists, and scholars were subject to this surveillance. Their experiments, no matter how brilliant or sacred, were meticulously documented and reported to the councils. Failures were not simply scientific setbacks. They were evaluated for their potential political or spiritual consequences. Successes, too, were scrutinized, ensuring that no single individual could gain disproportionate power. The emperor's obsession with control extended even to knowledge, reinforcing the idea that the empire's survival depended on both brilliance and obedience. The council chambers themselves were spaces of tension and intrigue. Meetings were often conducted in whispers or coded language, with advisors relying on gestures, symbols, and secret writings to communicate. Decisions carried enormous weight, influencing not only policy but the fate of individuals, entire cities, and sometimes provinces. Councils were also instruments of fear. Dissenting members risked disappearance, exile, or worse. It is in these hidden chambers that the fate of the empire was debated, shaped, and sometimes sealed, far from the eyes of ordinary citizens who believed the emperor's power was absolute and unchallenged. Yet, the intelligence network was not merely defensive. It enabled the empire to manipulate perception, to maintain the illusion of omnipotence, and to enforce compliance without overt violence. Rumors, legends, and carefully crafted stories circulated among the populace, reinforcing the authority of dragons, the inevitability of divine favor, and the omniscience of the emperor. Citizens, unaware of the hidden council's orchestration, interpreted events as miracles or curses, while the empire's leaders knew they were the product of careful planning, surveillance, and strategic concealment. This intricate system also played a crucial role in preserving secrets. Archives, rituals, and alchemical experiments were shielded not only by physical barriers but by an almost psychological network of guardianship. Informants monitored those who accessed forbidden knowledge, and coded messages ensured that critical instructions could be transmitted without risk of interception. The emperor's vision of immortality, the manipulation of dragons, and the hidden cities were all safeguarded by this invisible web, a mechanism designed to make the empire both untouchable and nearly invisible. Ironically, the very intelligence network that maintained the empire may have contributed to its ultimate disappearance. By ensuring that knowledge, power, and secrets were concentrated in the hands of a few, the system made the civilization extraordinarily vulnerable to disruption. Should the emperor vanish, should the councils collapse, or should betrayal infiltrate the network, the mechanisms that had maintained control could unravel with astonishing speed. This fragility, masked by precision and secrecy, meant that a single chain reaction, natural disaster, betrayal, or internal failure, could wipe the empire from the memory of the world, leaving only traces of what once existed. Even now, centuries later, traces of this network are hinted at in surviving manuscripts, hidden passages, and the oral traditions of distant villages. Scholars discovering fragments of coded writings, obscure rituals, or strange operational patterns often feel the pulse of a system designed to anticipate, manipulate, and protect. The genius of the empire's hidden intelligence remains as enigmatic as its dragons and lost cities, a silent force that shaped events from the shadows, ensuring the survival of secrets long after the civilization itself vanished. Ultimately, the councils and intelligence networks were more than instruments of control. They were an embodiment of the emperor's obsession with foresight, mastery, and the preservation of knowledge. They illustrate a civilization that understood the fragility of human ambition and sought to guard itself against its own imperfections. And as we piece together these hidden mechanisms, one cannot help but marvel at the empire's sophistication while contemplating the haunting question. How does a civilization vanish so completely when it was so meticulously protected, and what does that tell us about the limits of human ambition? Even within the carefully constructed intelligence networks and hidden councils, some secrets remained elusive, slipping through even the most sophisticated systems. Espionage in the empire was not merely a matter of observation. It was an art, a delicate dance of deception, loyalty, and danger. Agents operated in shadows, disguised as merchants, priests, or even traveling performers, their identities known only to a handful of the emperor's inner circle. Their task was both simple and impossible: to uncover threats, track allegiances, and ensure that the empire's deepest secrets remained secure, all while navigating a world of intrigue, ambition, and betrayal where one misstep could be fatal. Messages were often encoded with ciphers so complex that only a select few could interpret them. Scrolls containing vital intelligence were divided into fragments, hidden in everyday objects, or disguised as innocuous correspondence. Even those entrusted with delivering the messages sometimes did not know their content, carrying them merely as conduits of information. Scholars later attempting to decode these transmissions described the precision and creativity involved. Numerical patterns, astrological symbols, and references to dragons were all interwoven to convey meaning while concealing it from prying eyes. It was a system designed to protect the empire's knowledge, but it was also a labyrinth capable of ensnaring its own creators. Key figures in the empire, generals, ministers, alchemists, disappeared with alarming regularity, their fates often unexplained. Some vanished during diplomatic missions, leaving behind only cryptic messages or fragments of personal notes hinting at betrayal, danger, or secret discoveries. Others were found years later in distant provinces, changed, silent, or broken, their memories of events incomplete and unreliable. Oral histories speak of entire families erased for perceived disloyalty, their estates abandoned, and their names stricken from every record. These disappearances were both a tool and a warning, reinforcing the empire's reach and the high stakes of power within its walls. The empire's mastery of espionage extended to the manipulation of perception. Rumors, false messages, and staged events were orchestrated to mislead adversaries, misdirect internal factions, or obscure the truth of alchemical experiments. Observers often believed they had uncovered critical information, only to discover that they had been following illusions deliberately crafted to protect deeper secrets. Even dragons, whether real or symbolic, were invoked in coded communications, their imagery serving as both warning and authentication. The empire operated in a constant state of controlled uncertainty, leveraging fear, mystery, and brilliance to maintain dominance. These layers of secrecy had profound human consequences. The constant surveillance, coded communications, and threat of disappearance created an atmosphere of perpetual tension. Officials, scholars, and courtiers lived with the knowledge that loyalty could never be fully verified and that a single misstep could trigger ruin. Yet, paradoxically, this fear also fostered innovation and creativity. Agents developed new methods of concealment, scholars crafted codes of unmatched sophistication, and even ordinary citizens participated in rituals and ceremonies that reinforced the empire's hidden hierarchy. Life under such conditions was a delicate balance of caution, ingenuity, and resilience. Some of the most compelling evidence of the empire's espionage comes from hidden manuscripts and cryptic diaries discovered centuries later. These texts hint at secret missions, clandestine alliances, and moments when the empire narrowly avoided internal collapse. One fragment describes an operative intercepting a plot against the emperor, decoding a message in which dragons were used as allegorical references to political factions, and preventing a rebellion before it could even begin. The precision, foresight, and subtlety of these actions reveal a civilization that understood the deadly combination of ambition, secrecy, and knowledge, and sought to harness it fully. Yet, even the most meticulous intelligence system could not prevent the empire's ultimate disappearance. The cumulative effect of betrayal, natural disaster, alchemical experiments, and human ambition proved too great, overwhelming even the most sophisticated networks. Entire councils vanished, messages were lost, and the intricate web of spies collapsed, leaving behind a landscape of mystery, ruins, and oral histories. Scholars attempting to reconstruct these networks are left with tantalizing glimpses of operations, patterns, and coded messages, but never the complete picture. The empire's genius, its brilliance, and its secrecy became, in a sense, part of the very reason it was forgotten. The disappearances, coded messages, and espionage of the empire illustrate a civilization both brilliant and fragile. It was a society that sought to master knowledge, manipulate reality, and extend life beyond natural limits, yet it was also vulnerable to the very forces it sought to control. Its agents, hidden messages, and vanished figures serve as reminders that no matter how advanced or secretive a civilization becomes, human ambition, error, and the inexorable passage of time can unravel even the most carefully woven systems. In the quiet aftermath, the empire left behind shadows, fragmented manuscripts, ruined cities, and oral histories that speak of a civilization obsessed with control, secrecy, and mastery over the unknown. The ghosts of spies, missing ministers, and vanished citizens linger in the margins of history, challenging us to consider what was lost and what might still be discovered. And in this intricate dance of secrecy and disappearance, one question remains. How much of history has been deliberately hidden, and how many empires, like this one, wait quietly beneath the surface, their secrets lost to time but not entirely erased? Beneath the visible grandeur of palaces, temples, and dragon rituals, the empire thrived on an economic system as sophisticated as it was secretive. Hidden trade routes span mountains, rivers, and deserts, linking distant provinces and distant lands that were scarcely known to outsiders. Merchants traveled in caravans that doubled as intelligence networks, carrying goods, information, and coded messages simultaneously. Markets were bustling not only with commodities but with the silent exchange of secrets, forming a web of commerce that sustained the empire's ambition while shielding it from prying eyes. The empire's wealth was concentrated in both tangible and intangible forms. Gold, silver, rare minerals, and precious artifacts were carefully stored in vaults protected by complex systems, secret doors, and hidden traps. But equally valuable were the intangible assets, knowledge, loyalty, and information. Traders and couriers became guardians of commerce and intelligence alike, their networks forming the veins through which the empire's lifeblood flowed. The movement of goods was meticulously regulated, with every transaction observed, recorded, and interpreted for both economic and political significance. Even a seemingly minor trade could carry strategic weight, influencing alliances, stability, and the flow of power. Some of the most remarkable aspects of the empire's economy were its hidden workshops and production centers. These sites, often located in remote regions or underground, produced everything from intricately crafted textiles to complex alchemical instruments. Craftsmen and alchemists worked under strict secrecy, their labor overseen by supervisors who reported directly to the emperor or his councils. Products from these workshops were not only practical but symbolic, designed to convey power, religious authority, and the emperor's vision to both internal and external audiences. Rare goods were often reserved for ceremonies, gifts to foreign dignitaries, or strategic leverage, further intertwining wealth with politics and secrecy. Trade with neighboring lands was conducted with careful discretion. Officially, the empire appeared to maintain modest, polite relations, yet behind the scenes, merchants and envoys facilitated exchanges that enriched the empire far beyond what official records suggest. Exotic spices, rare metals, and even knowledge of distant cultures flowed into the empire, while manufactured goods, alchemical substances, and symbolic artifacts were exported in carefully controlled quantities. These exchanges reinforced both power and secrecy, allowing the empire to project influence while maintaining an aura of mystery. Some accounts hint that the dragons themselves, whether real or symbolic, were used as a mark of authenticity or protection for certain trades, signaling that goods were sanctioned by the emperor and bound by secrecy. The empire's hidden economic networks also played a crucial role in sustaining its secretive projects. Construction of underground cities, maintenance of alchemical laboratories, and the orchestration of rituals required resources far beyond what ordinary governance would demand. Funds and materials were diverted through complex channels, often disguised as mundane transactions, to ensure that these projects remained invisible to both citizens and rival powers. Even the collection of taxes was carefully manipulated to funnel resources where they were needed most, reinforcing control while avoiding scrutiny. Economic ingenuity, secrecy, and adaptability were thus as central to the empire's survival as its military might or mystical practices. Yet these systems were not infallible. Natural disasters, political betrayals, and the inherent fragility of secrecy threatened the flow of resources at every turn. Caravans disappeared, workshops were abandoned, and wealth meant to fund critical projects was sometimes lost or misappropriated. The very network that allowed the empire to flourish could also become a source of vulnerability, as a single disruption, whether a stolen shipment, a failed trade, or a betrayed courier, could ripple across the empire, imperiling not just economic stability but the empire's hidden ambitions. Even the surviving evidence reveals remarkable sophistication. Archaeologists have uncovered remnants of fortified trade depots, buried caches of rare materials, and traces of sophisticated accounting systems that suggest the empire meticulously monitored its wealth. Oral histories speak of secret vaults accessible only to the most trusted officials, and of treasures so vast that a single province's wealth could rival the holdings of entire contemporary kingdoms. These economic structures were more than financial, they were strategic instruments, reinforcing secrecy, loyalty, and the projection of power across the empire. Ultimately, the empire's hidden economy illustrates the interdependence of wealth, secrecy, and survival. Trade, production, and resource management were not merely practical concerns. They were part of a broader strategy to preserve knowledge, sustain mystical and military projects, and maintain the illusion of an unstoppable civilization. The empire's brilliance lay not only in its dragons or rituals, but in its ability to weave commerce, intelligence, and secrecy into a seamless, enduring fabric. Yet this very complexity, magnificent as it was, also rendered the empire vulnerable. A civilization that relies on hidden networks for its lifeblood is a civilization that can vanish silently, leaving behind ruins, artifacts, and whispers, but few clear records of the extraordinary power that once coursed through its veins. Beneath the grand palaces, secret councils, and hidden trade networks lay the backbone of the empire, its military. The army was not merely a force of men and weapons. It was an extension of the emperor's vision, trained to embody discipline, strategy, and reverence for the dragons that symbolized the empire's power. Every soldier, from the rank and file to the elite guards, was indoctrinated not only in combat but in loyalty, secrecy, and an understanding of the empire's mystical framework. The dragons were not just symbols. They were woven into the very structure of military doctrine, inspiring awe, fear, and unwavering obedience. Elite units formed the tip of the empire's military spear. Known only through fragments of scrolls and scattered oral accounts, these forces were said to possess skills beyond ordinary soldiers. They trained in techniques designed to anticipate both human and supernatural threats, mastering formations, signals, and tactics that combined agility with intelligence. Some were tasked with guarding the emperor directly, while others operated in the shadows, protecting key supply lines, covert trade routes, and secret laboratories. Their presence was rarely seen, yet their influence ensured that the empire's ambitions were shielded from both internal and external dangers. Dragons played an integral role in the military, both practically and symbolically. Chronicles describe how dragon motifs adorned armor, banners, and siege engines, inspiring troops and intimidating enemies. In some oral histories, dragons themselves were said to participate in battles, swooping over fields to scatter opposing forces or acting as messengers and guardians. While the literal existence of dragons remains debated, the psychological impact was undeniable. Soldiers were trained to respond to the presence of dragons, or even the mere suggestion of them, with discipline and focus, turning fear into an instrument of control. In this way, the myth became as powerful as reality, shaping battlefield dynamics and reinforcing the emperor's omnipotence. The military strategy extended beyond conventional warfare. Spies, scouts, and engineers collaborated with the army to control terrain, manipulate perception, and execute operations that blurred the line between combat and spectacle. Siege engines were deployed with precision, fortifications enhanced with hidden chambers, and signals relayed through coded sounds, lights, or symbolic banners. Even battles themselves could be orchestrated to project power, suppress rebellion, or protect hidden cities and alchemical projects. Every element of warfare was entwined with the empire's obsession with secrecy, ensuring that victories were as much about perception as they were about force. Discipline and loyalty were enforced with remarkable rigor. Soldiers were indoctrinated from youth, trained in both physical endurance and mental resilience. Betrayal was met with swift and often invisible consequences, reinforcing a culture in which obedience was as vital as courage. Yet, the human element remained ever present. Soldiers experienced fear, doubt, and even moments of wonder when witnessing dragons, witnessing the rituals, or navigating the empire's hidden corridors. The military, like the empire itself, was a delicate balance between awe-inspiring mastery and the fragile human spirit. The logistics of the empire's military were equally extraordinary. Supply chains moved with astonishing efficiency, often concealed through the same networks that supported commerce and espionage. Armories, hidden depots, and underground barracks ensured that forces could be deployed anywhere quickly, sustaining operations while remaining largely invisible to enemies and ordinary citizens alike. Even the emperor's personal guard was supported by a network of concealed tunnels, secret passages, and coded signals, allowing for near-instant response to threats both mundane and extraordinary. This combination of planning, secrecy, and strategic brilliance gave the empire a level of military resilience rarely seen in history. Yet, as with the other facets of the empire, this military power was not immune to vulnerability. Natural disasters, internal betrayal, and miscalculated campaigns could, and sometimes did, undermine its strength. Some oral histories recount entire legions disappearing into treacherous terrain, swallowed by floods or earthquakes, or being decimated by unforeseen circumstances. The elite units, trained to anticipate both human and supernatural threats, could not control the unpredictable forces of nature or the unintended consequences of the emperor's alchemical experiments. These vulnerabilities, hidden beneath layers of planning and discipline, foreshadowed the empire's eventual vulnerability and disappearance. Ultimately, the military was more than protection. It was an embodiment of the empire's philosophy. Strength, secrecy, and the integration of dragons, ritual, and intelligence reflected a civilization that sought to master both the physical and the mystical. Soldiers were the living threads connecting the emperor's vision to the tangible world, defending secrets, sustaining rituals, and maintaining the illusion of invincibility. In the ruins, in oral traditions, and in fragments of manuscripts, one can trace the echoes of these forces, hinting at the discipline, ambition, and peril that defined an empire built as much on fear and belief as on steel and strategy. The story of the military illustrates a larger truth about the empire. Power alone was never enough. The intertwining of belief, secrecy, ritual, and human skill created a civilization both magnificent and precarious. And as we contemplate the vanished legions and the dragons that may or may not have flown above them, the haunting question emerges. Could any army, no matter how brilliant, withstand the convergence of ambition, disaster, and secrecy that ultimately erased this empire from the pages of history? Beyond the visible ranks of soldiers and the grandeur of dragon-adorned banners, the empire relied on a covert network of spies and operatives whose work remained hidden even from many within the military. These agents operated in the shadows, moving silently through cities, provinces, and remote lands, observing, manipulating, and reporting with unwavering precision. They were the unseen hand of the emperor, ensuring that loyalty was maintained, conspiracies were intercepted, and secrets, whether of alchemy, trade, or ritual, remained impenetrable. Their missions were not merely about intelligence. They were about survival, control, and the preservation of a civilization that depended as much on secrecy as on strength. The operatives were trained in a combination of stealth, combat, and the reading of human behavior. They could blend seamlessly into a marketplace crowd, a remote village, or a royal court, often going unnoticed for months at a time. Many were skilled in codes, symbols, and disguised communications, ensuring that messages could be sent without risk of interception. Some were alchemists themselves, capable of creating substances that aided in observation, concealment, or even incapacitation. Their tools were as much psychological as physical, as they manipulated perception, instilled doubt, and orchestrated events to maintain the emperor's omnipotence. One particularly enigmatic account describes an operative who infiltrated a faction plotting rebellion in the empire's western provinces. Using a combination of coded messages, disguised letters, and careful observation, the agent dismantled the conspiracy without a single battle, turning the rebels against one another and reporting the outcome directly to the emperor. Such precision exemplifies the delicate balance between control and invisibility. The empire's power often rested not on force but on the ability to act without being seen, to intervene with subtlety and efficiency that left observers bewildered. These covert operations were closely integrated with the empire's military and intelligence networks. Military forces provided protection and rapid response if a mission failed or escalated, while councils ensured that critical decisions were informed by accurate intelligence. Spies often collaborated with couriers, merchants, and alchemists, creating a system in which information flowed seamlessly, yet invisibly. This interplay between visible and hidden power was central to the empire's resilience, allowing it to suppress threats before they became crises and maintain the illusion of omniscience and invincibility. Coded communication played a crucial role in these operations. Messages were fragmented, hidden within mundane correspondence, and sometimes encrypted with symbols representing dragons, celestial patterns, or alchemical formulas. Only those trained in these systems could interpret them, and even a minor error could have catastrophic consequences. This system of secrecy reinforced loyalty, encouraged ingenuity, and created a sense of awe for those who understood it. Every message, every sign, and every observation was a calculated component in a vast, intricate design, a testament to the empire's mastery of information and control. Yet the human element remained a source of both strength and vulnerability. Operatives lived under constant pressure, navigating a world in which trust was scarce. Danger was omnipresent, and discovery could mean death. They faced moral dilemmas, the psychological toll of isolation, and the weight of decisions that affected entire provinces. Oral histories recount agents vanishing mysteriously, leaving behind cryptic notes or hints of betrayal, their fates unknown but their work leaving lasting effects. These disappearances contributed to the empire's mystique, reinforcing the sense that its power operated on both tangible and almost supernatural levels. The covert missions were not only defensive but also proactive. Spies gathered intelligence on foreign powers, monitored environmental threats, and even ensured the secrecy of alchemical and dragon-related experiments. Some missions extended into distant lands, crossing mountains, deserts, and rivers to retrieve rare substances, enforce secret treaties, or observe celestial phenomena crucial for the empire's mystical practices. Success was measured not only by immediate results but by the subtle reinforcement of control, the prevention of dissent, and the protection of knowledge that could not fall into the wrong hands. Despite the sophistication of these networks, the very reliance on covert operations also revealed the empire's fragility. Information could be misinterpreted, agents could fail or vanish, and a single compromised mission might ripple into larger consequences. The secrecy that protected the empire also isolated its decision-makers, creating blind spots that could, and eventually did, contribute to its erasure. Oral histories hint at a point when multiple agents disappeared simultaneously during a critical event, leaving the emperor without accurate intelligence at a time when disaster, both natural and human-made, was closing in. The story of espionage and covert missions illuminates the extraordinary lengths to which the empire went to preserve itself. It demonstrates a civilization obsessed with anticipation, control, and mastery over both human and supernatural forces. And yet, it also exposes the inherent vulnerability of a system so reliant on secrecy, precision, and human discipline. As we study fragments of messages, diaries, and artifacts, one cannot help but marvel at the ingenuity while sensing the fragility. An empire so brilliantly orchestrated, yet ultimately unable to withstand the converging forces that would erase it from history. In the end, these hidden operatives were both the guardians and the silent witnesses of the empire's ambition. Their stories, largely lost to time, hint at a civilization whose survival depended not only on dragons, armies, and rituals, but on the invisible threads of observation, deception, and subtle manipulation. Through their unseen work, the empire achieved heights of control and secrecy that remain almost unimaginable, leaving behind a legacy of mystery, strategy, and the haunting question: can even the most meticulous human design survive the unpredictable convergence of ambition, betrayal, and fate? Beneath the towering spires, hidden chambers, and secret passageways of the empire lay its most enigmatic treasures. Mystical artifacts, objects of immense power and mystery, whose significance extended far beyond mere wealth or craftsmanship. These artifacts were woven into the very fabric of the empire's rituals, military strategy, and secretive governance, each one believed to contain forces capable of shaping destiny itself. Some were inscribed with symbols no living scholar could fully decipher, while others were rumored to hold condensed cosmic energy, the essence of dragons, or the distilled knowledge of centuries of alchemical experimentation. Possession of such objects was both a privilege and a peril, for the artifacts were said to respond to intent, loyalty, and even fear. Among the most revered artifacts were the dragon seals, intricately carved emblems believed to channel the emperor's connection to the mystical creatures. Each seal was unique, containing hidden compartments, encoded messages, and mystical inscriptions that only certain priests, alchemists, or members of the inner council could interpret. These seals were used in rituals, sent on covert missions, or employed to authenticate communications across the empire. Oral histories suggest that some seals could influence natural events, commanding weather, water, or fire in ways that seemed miraculous. Possession was a mark of trust, but misuse could invite catastrophe, a reminder that the empire's greatest powers were as dangerous as they were potent. Other artifacts were crafted for specific alchemical purposes. Crystal vessels, metallic instruments, and ceremonial objects acted as conduits for energy, amplifying the effects of rituals or storing forces harnessed during mystical experiments. Some contained substances derived from rare minerals, dragon remains, or other materials whose properties remain mysterious to this day. Alchemists who worked with these artifacts underwent years of training, learning not only to manipulate the materials but to respect their volatile and unpredictable nature. A single miscalculation could result in explosions, poisoning, or worse, leaving behind a ruined laboratory and a trail of fear among those who survived. The artifacts were also deeply political. Gifts to foreign emissaries, tokens of allegiance, and ceremonial objects were carefully distributed to project power and maintain influence without revealing the true extent of the empire's hidden capabilities. Some items were deliberately displayed in palaces or marketplaces, their impressive craftsmanship intended to awe citizens and rivals alike, while their mystical properties remained a secret. By controlling access to these artifacts, the emperor ensured that knowledge, power, and fear flowed according to his designs, reinforcing both obedience and reverence. Legends suggest that some artifacts held sentience or a form of consciousness, particularly those associated with dragons. Priests and scholars whispered that certain objects could perceive disloyalty, detect hidden intentions, or even act autonomously to protect the empire's secrets. Stories recount instances in which a dragon seal reacted violently to perceived betrayal, shattering, emitting strange lights, or triggering minor disasters. While these accounts may have been symbolic, they reinforced the perception that the empire's power was intertwined with forces beyond mortal understanding. The artifacts became both instruments and warnings, tangible embodiments of the empire's ambition, faith, and danger. The placement and storage of these artifacts were as secretive as the objects themselves. Hidden vaults, underground chambers, and remote mountain temples housed treasures inaccessible to ordinary citizens. Guardians, often selected from elite soldiers or priests, devoted their lives to their protection, understanding that the loss of a single artifact could jeopardize both ritual practice and political stability. Some vaults were designed with traps, complex mechanisms, and coded locks that required both knowledge and intuition to bypass, creating layers of security as sophisticated as the empire's intelligence networks. The emotional weight of these objects cannot be understated. They were symbols of divine favor, human ingenuity, and the precariousness of power. To hold an artifact was to feel the pulse of centuries of ambition and knowledge, to touch something that embodied the hopes, fears, and obsessions of a civilization striving to bend reality itself. Many who encountered these artifacts, whether priests, alchemists, or operatives, described experiences of awe, fear, and profound reverence, moments that left an indelible mark on memory and consciousness. Yet these mystical objects were also fragile in more than a physical sense. Their power could not be entirely controlled. Their significance depended on secrecy, and their influence sometimes exacted unforeseen consequences. In combination with natural disasters, political betrayal, and the volatility of human ambition, the artifacts contributed to the empire's ultimate vulnerability. They were at once a source of supremacy and a potential catalyst for downfall, reflecting the precarious balance that defined the civilization. Even now, centuries later, remnants of these artifacts surface in unexpected places, buried in ruins, hidden in remote caves, or discovered in private collections. Archaeologists, historians, and adventurers uncover fragments, symbols, and materials that hint at extraordinary capabilities, yet the full understanding of these objects remains tantalizingly out of reach. Their very existence challenges our conception of history, technology, and the limits of human imagination. Ultimately, the empire's mystical artifacts reveal a civilization obsessed with transcending mortality, mastering forces beyond comprehension, and controlling both seen and unseen worlds. They were the physical manifestation of ambition, secrecy, and belief, a tangible connection between humans and the dragons, between ritual and reality, between power and peril. To study them is to glimpse the heart of a lost empire, a civilization that reached for the extraordinary, whose artifacts continue to whisper of brilliance, danger, and the secrets that time has not entirely silenced. Scattered across remote mountains, hidden valleys, and the mist-shrouded edges of rivers lie the echoes of cities that once thrived under the empire's rule. These lost urban centers, now reduced to ruins, offer tantalizing glimpses of a civilization that mastered architecture, secrecy, and the integration of mystical belief into daily life. Unlike ordinary settlements, these cities were designed with both function and concealment in mind. Streets twisted in ways that disoriented outsiders, public buildings hid secret chambers, and underground tunnels connected temples, vaults, and workshops in a labyrinthine network meant to shelter both knowledge and people from prying eyes. The architecture of these cities reflected the empire's dual obsession with beauty and secrecy. Towers soared into the sky, their surfaces carved with dragons, celestial motifs, and cryptic symbols. Temples and palaces were oriented to align with stars, mountains, and rivers, suggesting a deliberate synchronization with cosmic forces. Residential quarters often concealed hidden rooms, escape passages, and observation points, allowing the ruling elite to monitor both citizens and visitors. Even marketplaces, seemingly bustling with ordinary commerce, were designed to facilitate the secret movement of goods, messages, and personnel, integrating the empire's mystical, political, and economic ambitions into the urban landscape itself. Archaeological evidence suggests that these cities were marvels of engineering as well as secrecy. Walls reinforced with rare metals, hidden cisterns for water storage, and subterranean chambers capable of sheltering thousands indicate meticulous planning and foresight. Roads and bridges were built with an understanding of terrain that minimized exposure to potential invaders while maximizing connectivity for trade and intelligence operations. Some ruins hint at advanced alchemical laboratories integrated within city designs, spaces where scholars and priests could perform experiments away from the public eye. These findings reveal a civilization that blended technology, magic, and strategy with astonishing sophistication. Hidden chambers were central to the life of these cities. Beneath temples, palaces, and even ordinary homes, secret rooms held everything from mystical artifacts to records of trade, intelligence, and rituals. These chambers were protected by coded locks, traps, and physical obstacles, accessible only to those with precise knowledge of the empire's security protocols. Some rooms contained dragon seals, alchemical instruments, or scrolls that chronicled celestial alignments and mystical practices, indicating that the pursuit of knowledge was inseparable from the empire's religious and political ambitions. The layout and function of these chambers suggest a civilization obsessed with controlling access to information, a society in which secrecy was a safeguard as critical as walls or soldiers. Oral histories and fragmented texts hint at entire sections of cities intentionally concealed or abandoned, their locations now known only to the landscape itself. Valleys that once housed bustling neighborhoods are now overgrown with forest, and rivers that powered industry have shifted course, leaving behind only stone foundations and echoing corridors. Some ruins are said to contain layers of previous construction, built atop older settlements in a deliberate attempt to hide both history and knowledge from outsiders. This stratification suggests that the empire was not only aware of the impermanence of human structures but actively sought to control what future generations would uncover. The cities were also centers of ritual and ceremonial life. Temples were often at the heart of urban planning, designed to maximize symbolic and cosmic significance. Ritual spaces were meticulously aligned with celestial patterns, with hidden altars, subterranean chambers, and dragon motifs integrated into their design. Citizens may have been unaware of the full depth of these spaces, participating in festivals, markets, or ceremonies that masked the true complexity of the empire's mystical undertakings. The lost cities thus reveal a civilization that intertwined everyday life, religious observance, and secrecy in ways that ensured both social cohesion and the protection of extraordinary knowledge. Yet, despite their grandeur and careful design, these cities were not immune to the empire's fragility. Earthquakes, floods, internal rebellion, and the eventual collapse of intelligence networks contributed to their abandonment and decay. Some settlements may have been deliberately evacuated, their inhabitants relocated to preserve secrecy or consolidate resources. Over time, the combination of natural forces and human decisions erased much of the empire's visible presence, leaving behind only the skeletal outlines of streets, temples, and palaces, whispering stories of brilliance, power, and vulnerability. Modern discoveries, excavated ruins, cryptic inscriptions, and remnants of hidden chambers provide tantalizing evidence of the empire's sophistication. Archaeologists have found traces of underground tunnels, fortified vaults, and ceremonial platforms, as well as artifacts indicating advanced metallurgy, alchemy, and symbolic art. Yet much remains elusive, and each discovery raises more questions than answers. What was the full scope of these hidden cities? How many layers of secrecy remain buried beneath the ruins? And what does their disappearance tell us about the impermanence of even the most powerful civilizations? Ultimately, the lost cities are a testament to the empire's ingenuity, ambition, and obsession with secrecy. They reveal a civilization that sought to harmonize the mystical, the practical, and the political, embedding its ideology into the very stones of its urban landscape. And as we walk through these ruins, imagining the streets alive with citizens, ceremonies, and hidden machinations, we are confronted with a haunting question. How can an empire that built such extraordinary cities vanish so completely, leaving only whispers, shadows, and the echoes of dragons that may have never existed? In the heart of the empire's lost cities and hidden chambers lay a treasure perhaps more valuable than gold, artifacts, or even dragons themselves: knowledge. Secret libraries, meticulously concealed and fiercely guarded, contained manuscripts, scrolls, and texts that chronicled everything from history and philosophy to alchemy, ritual, and the esoteric sciences. These libraries were not mere repositories of learning. They were instruments of power, designed to consolidate, control, and preserve the empire's most guarded secrets. Access was strictly limited, and each document was encoded, annotated, or layered with meaning that only trained scholars or council members could fully interpret. The manuscripts were astonishing in both scope and depth. Some chronicled the genealogy of the imperial family, linking rulers not only to divine favor, but to mystical dragons believed to guide the empire's destiny. Others contained astronomical observations, sophisticated mathematical formulas, and alchemical recipes that attempted to manipulate the natural world in ways that modern science still struggles to understand. Legends suggest that a few scrolls held instructions for interacting with dragons, harnessing celestial energies, or prolonging life. Every piece of knowledge was both a key and a weapon, offering immense potential to those who could decipher it and posing catastrophic risks if misused. These hidden libraries were strategically located within palaces, temples, and underground vaults. Some were accessible only through secret doors, intricate mechanisms, or hidden staircases that challenged even the most determined seekers. Guardians, often elite scholars or priests, dedicated their lives to protecting these texts. They memorized codes, studied rituals to maintain secrecy, and enforced strict rules. A single misstep could mean the permanent loss of knowledge, the destabilization of the empire, or even death for the intruder. In this way, the preservation of wisdom was inseparable from the empire's control, and the line between intellectual pursuit and political strategy blurred completely. The content of these libraries reveals a civilization deeply invested in understanding both the natural and supernatural. Scrolls on medicine, herbalism, and astronomy coexisted with texts on mystical rituals, divination, and coded political strategies. The empire treated knowledge as a living entity, something to be cultivated, protected, and wielded with precision. It was a dangerous but brilliant system. The more powerful and secretive the knowledge, the greater the potential to shape destiny, influence rivals, and safeguard the civilization from both internal and external threats. Some manuscripts were deliberately encoded to prevent casual reading, employing multiple layers of symbolism, allegory, and linguistic complexity. Numerical ciphers, astrological references, and dragon motifs were integrated into texts to hide the true meaning. Only a combination of scholarly skill, intuition, and ritualistic understanding could unlock the secrets contained within. In some cases, knowledge was compartmentalized, with different scrolls required to reconstruct a complete understanding of a concept. This approach ensured that power and insight remained concentrated among those the emperor deemed trustworthy, while safeguarding the empire's most dangerous and valuable secrets. The libraries also played a crucial role in the empire's long-term planning. Scholars were tasked with maintaining records of trade, intelligence, military campaigns, and mystical experiments. They compiled data on population, resources, and environmental patterns, producing insights that guided both policy and clandestine operations. The preservation of these records ensured continuity, even in the face of rebellion, natural disaster, or political upheaval. The empire's success depended not only on force and ritual, but on this meticulous collection and analysis of knowledge, a silent engine that drove both survival and expansion. Yet, even these libraries could not withstand time, disaster, and human ambition. Fires, earthquakes, and invasions destroyed countless texts, while political purges and secrecy policies led to the intentional destruction of others. Some manuscripts were lost when guardians vanished or chose to conceal their knowledge permanently. What remains today are fragments, scattered scrolls, and oral recollections that hint at the empire's extraordinary intellectual breadth. Every recovered manuscript sparks both fascination and frustration, revealing glimpses of brilliance while leaving vast gaps that may never be filled. The surviving texts continue to inspire scholars and adventurers alike, suggesting practices and knowledge that border on the impossible. Alchemical formulas hint at energy manipulation. Coded treatises describe celestial alignments that seem precise beyond modern comprehension, and ritual manuals describe interactions with forces that may have been symbolic, mystical, or something beyond our understanding. The libraries demonstrate that the empire's mastery of knowledge was as central to its power as its military, intelligence networks, and hidden cities. Ultimately, the empire's hidden libraries and manuscripts reveal a civilization obsessed with foresight, mastery, and the control of information. They were not merely records of the past but tools to shape the present and influence the future. Through them, the emperor could govern unseen, influence belief, and maintain the illusion of divine authority. And even now, centuries later, the fragments that remain challenge our understanding of what the empire achieved, offering tantalizing hints of knowledge so extraordinary that it could change the way we perceive both history and the potential of human ingenuity. The story of these libraries is a story of ambition, secrecy, and the pursuit of mastery. They remind us that knowledge can be both a shield and a weapon, that wisdom can inspire awe as much as fear, and that even the most brilliant civilizations leave mysteries behind that continue to haunt and fascinate the world long after their disappearance. In the heart of the empire, beyond palaces, libraries, and secret chambers, lay the true seat of power, the mystical rituals and ceremonies that shaped the lives, beliefs, and loyalty of every citizen. These rites were not mere performances. They were carefully orchestrated instruments of influence, designed to intertwine faith, fear, and obedience. Each ceremony was layered with symbolism, drawing on dragons, celestial patterns, and alchemical principles to project authority, consolidate power, and manipulate perception. The spectacle of the ritual, the subtle manipulation of light, sound, and movement, all served to create an overwhelming sense of awe, an experience that transcended ordinary understanding and bound citizens emotionally and psychologically to the emperor. Rituals varied in scale and complexity. Some were intimate, performed in hidden chambers for the emperor's council or elite operatives, involving precise sequences of incantation, offering, and observation. Others were public, conducted in massive temples or open squares where hundreds, sometimes thousands, of citizens gathered to witness the unfolding of mystical power. Music, incense, and ceremonial objects played a central role, each carefully chosen to evoke emotion and focus attention. Dragon motifs appeared everywhere, carved into altars, embroidered into robes, and even traced in sand or ash during processions. These symbols reminded participants of the emperor's divine mandate and the ever-present influence of forces beyond mortal comprehension. The psychological impact of these rituals cannot be overstated. Citizens reported feelings of awe, reverence, and sometimes fear that bordered on paralysis. Observers often left convinced that the emperor was not merely a ruler but a conduit for higher, almost supernatural powers. Even officials, priests, and soldiers, trained to maintain rationality, were affected. The ceremonies reinforced hierarchy, loyalty, and obedience, ensuring that even those with power operated within the emperor's intended framework. Manipulation of perception was central to the empire's strategy, and the rituals were the apex of this mastery, blending spectacle, belief, and control into a seamless experience that few could resist or question. Some rituals were directly tied to alchemical or mystical experiments. Priests and alchemists worked in concert, using ceremonial sequences to harness energies, test substances, or open hidden channels of perception. Dragons, whether present as symbolic figures or invoked through incantation, were believed to amplify these energies, guiding the flow of cosmic and earthly forces. Certain rites were performed to protect the empire from disasters, ensure successful harvests, or strengthen military campaigns. Every gesture, chant, and artifact had layered significance, a combination of practical outcome and psychological reinforcement that maintained both secrecy and control. The rituals also reinforced the empire's intelligence and espionage networks. Some ceremonies included hidden signals, coded movements, or offerings designed to convey messages to operatives, identify loyalty, or test obedience. Citizens, officials, and soldiers were simultaneously participants and instruments, their reactions observed, analyzed, and interpreted to assess the stability of the empire. In this way, rituals were both sacred and strategic, blending belief with governance in a manner that few other civilizations have ever achieved. Yet, these ceremonies were not without danger. Missteps, whether accidental or intentional, could provoke disasters, symbolic or real. Alchemical reactions might spiral beyond control, celestial alignments might fail to correspond, or emotional intensity could push participants into hysteria or rebellion. The emperor and his inner council understood that power carried risk. The very elements that made the rituals compelling also made them fragile. It was a delicate balance, requiring precision, foresight, and a deep understanding of human psychology. The personal stakes were immense. Priests, scholars, and operatives involved in these ceremonies bore the weight of the empire's survival. Each action had consequences both immediate and far-reaching, for the state and for individuals. Loyalty, courage, and skill were constantly tested, and failure could mean banishment, death, or the compromise of secrets that had taken generations to cultivate. Yet the same rituals that enforced discipline also inspired devotion, innovation, and unity, illustrating the duality of the empire's approach. Power exercised through both fear and fascination. Evidence of these rituals survives in fragments of manuscripts, ruined temples, and cryptic carvings. Scholars and archaeologists attempting to reconstruct the ceremonies are confronted with tantalizing details. Symbols that defy complete interpretation, instruments designed for unknown functions, and sequences that suggest layers of meaning lost to time. Even partial reconstructions reveal the meticulous planning, psychological sophistication, and audacious ambition underlying each ritual. They show a civilization that treated faith, magic, and governance not as separate spheres, but as interconnected tools for shaping reality itself. Ultimately, the empire's mystical rituals and ceremonies exemplify the fusion of power, belief, and secrecy. They were not only performances but instruments of control, emotional engineering, and strategic influence, designed to maintain the cohesion of a civilization that depended as much on perception as on force. By manipulating the seen and unseen, the tangible and symbolic, the emperor maintained authority, loyalty, and the illusion of invincibility. And as we study these remnants today, the rituals leave a haunting question. How far can a civilization push the boundaries of belief, control, and perception before its own genius becomes its undoing? In the shadows of these ceremonies, amid the dragons, incense, and coded gestures, lies the soul of a lost empire. A civilization that fused mysticism, strategy, and psychological mastery into a breathtaking display of human ambition. The rituals were a reminder that power is not only wielded through armies, wealth, or knowledge, but through the subtle, profound, and sometimes terrifying influence over the hearts and minds of those who live within it. The empire's heartbeat once resonated across valleys, rivers, and mountains, a pulse that dictated the rhythm of daily life and the cadence of centuries. To walk through the ruins today is to feel the faint vibration of that energy, as if the stones themselves still remember the weight of ambition, ritual, and purpose. Each artifact, each fragment of writing, each carved symbol is a residue of human intention, a trace left by people who believed, with fervent certainty, that their world could be mastered, measured, and preserved. Their vision was audacious, their dedication relentless, and their understanding of both human psychology and the natural world surprisingly advanced for the era in which they lived. The sheer scope of their construction efforts hints at an empire that functioned not only through authority but through sophisticated organization. Roads and waterways were carefully designed to connect disparate settlements, facilitating trade, communication, and the rapid mobilization of resources. Bridges were built with an understanding of engineering principles that would not be matched in the region for centuries. Temples, fortifications, and administrative buildings reveal a society capable of large-scale coordination, where architects, laborers, and planners worked together to realize a vision that blended utility with symbolism. Every road, every building, every artifact was a deliberate act, intended to reinforce the structure and ideals of the empire. But the brilliance of the empire was inseparable from its fragility. Evidence of unrest appears in the form of abandoned villages, hastily fortified settlements, and weapons buried in secrecy. These traces indicate that, despite its apparent order, the empire constantly navigated tension between central authority and local independence. Tribes and communities once brought together under a common banner occasionally rebelled, testing the empire's ability to maintain cohesion. The archaeological record shows that some of these rebellions were met with force, others with negotiation or ritual, suggesting that the empire's leaders understood the delicate balance required to govern a diverse population. The empire's ingenuity extended beyond engineering into realms of culture, ritual, and symbolism. Bronze tablets, jade figurines, and carved stones were not merely decorative. They were functional instruments, imbued with meaning and designed to influence perception. One tablet shows a dragon coiled around an orb, claws extended in a gesture of protection and command, suggesting a society deeply concerned with the projection of power and the control of knowledge. Jade figures depict human forms suspended in ritualistic stances, accompanied by serpentine creatures with wings, implying a worldview in which the material and spiritual worlds were interconnected. These objects indicate that the empire's leaders sought to guide not only the physical actions of their people, but their beliefs, emotions, and understanding of the cosmos. Written records, though scarce, complement these artifacts and reveal a sophisticated system of knowledge management. Scroll fragments describe astronomical observations, rituals aligned with celestial cycles, and administrative practices that suggest a high degree of bureaucratic organization. One text mentions a Council of Shadows, a group entrusted with the protection and transmission of secret knowledge. Another fragment details the alignment of settlements with star patterns, demonstrating an awareness of celestial events that served both spiritual and practical purposes. These writings indicate that the empire's leadership recognized the importance of knowledge as a form of power, and they meticulously cultivated its preservation, distribution, and control. Oral histories from remote regions provide further insight, particularly into the empire's spiritual and symbolic systems. Tales of dragons are recurrent, portrayed not as literal creatures but as guardians, arbiters, and symbols of balance. These stories suggest that the empire deliberately intertwined myth and governance, using symbolism to maintain cohesion and inspire loyalty. Emissaries, traders, and ritual specialists carried these symbols across vast distances, ensuring that the empire's influence extended far beyond its administrative centers. Even as physical structures fell into decay, these narratives persisted, subtly embedding the empire's ethos into the cultural memory of future generations. The human dimension of the empire is evident in inscriptions, letters, and artifacts that record the lives of ordinary citizens. Pottery shards, engraved with personal markings, reveal moments of pride, fear, and devotion. Diaries, though fragmentary, recount experiences of laborers, traders, and artisans participating in grand construction projects or ritual ceremonies. Their voices offer a glimpse into the lived experience of empire, its daily routines, its challenges, its triumphs, and its moments of despair. These personal narratives remind us that behind every monumental achievement are countless individuals whose contributions, often unrecognized, sustain the machinery of civilization. Environmental pressures also shaped the empire's trajectory. Geological studies reveal periods of drought, flooding, and soil degradation that would have disrupted agriculture, trade, and settlement patterns. These natural challenges compounded existing social and political tensions, testing the resilience of governance and the adaptability of communities. Evidence of irrigation systems, terraced fields, and water management infrastructure suggests that the empire attempted to mitigate these risks, but environmental forces often exceeded human control. The interplay between natural events and human ambition illustrates how fragile even the most organized civilizations can be, emphasizing the empire's vulnerability despite its ingenuity. The empire's decline appears gradual, characterized by the slow unraveling of administrative control and the dispersal of populations. Settlements were abandoned, artifacts buried or lost, and written records fragmented or destroyed. Yet the empire's influence persisted in subtle ways, shaping cultural practices, architectural styles, and governance strategies of later societies. Symbols, rituals, and philosophical ideas carried forward into subsequent dynasties, demonstrating the endurance of concepts even when their physical embodiments vanished. The dragon, once a central emblem of authority, wisdom, and protection, survived as a cultural motif, highlighting the power of ideas to outlast empires. Psychological and cultural strategies were integral to the empire's cohesion. Temples and public spaces were deliberately designed to reinforce authority and shared belief systems. Rituals created a sense of belonging and purpose, fostering loyalty and compliance among diverse populations. Secretive practices ensured that knowledge and power remained concentrated among a select few, preserving social hierarchies and maintaining control over the empire's narrative. This combination of psychological insight, cultural influence, and political structure reflects a civilization that understood the interplay between belief, perception, and governance, an understanding that contributed both to its success and its eventual vulnerabilities. Artifacts scattered across the landscape reveal intentional manipulation of perception and memory. Roads directed travelers along routes that emphasized imperial symbolism, bridges created visual continuity between key sites, and ceremonial spaces aligned with celestial events to convey divine legitimacy. Burial practices were similarly strategic, with tombs positioned to communicate authority and influence beyond the immediate community. These methods suggest that the empire's leaders sought not merely to govern the present, but to shape collective memory, ensuring that their ideals would echo through generations even if the empire itself eventually fell. Yet, despite these sophisticated strategies, the empire could not withstand the combined pressures of rebellion, environmental disruption, and the inevitable erosion of time. Settlements decayed, trade networks collapsed, and centralized authority weakened. The fall was neither sudden nor violent in every instance. It was a complex process of attrition, punctuated by moments of upheaval and adaptation. The traces left behind, ruins, artifacts, inscriptions, serve as both evidence of human achievement and cautionary reminders of the fragility inherent in even the most brilliant systems of governance. The emotional resonance of the empire's story is profound. There is awe in the scale of its ambition, fascination in the sophistication of its organization, and tragedy in its eventual dissolution. Its remnants provoke reflection on the impermanence of human achievement and the enduring power of ideas. Even in absence, the empire communicates lessons about creativity, resilience, and the ways in which human societies navigate ambition, environment, and collective memory. The scattered pieces of its story invite empathy, curiosity, and a sense of connection across centuries. Finally, the empire's legacy challenges contemporary perceptions of history. It demonstrates that civilizations are not static, that influence can persist even when physical structures and political systems collapse. Artifacts, oral traditions, and cultural diffusion serve as enduring markers of an empire's existence, reminding us that history is not solely written in chronicles and official records, but also in the intangible transmission of ideas, beliefs, and symbols. The Dragon Empire's story is a testament to the enduring human capacity to create, imagine, and shape the world, even when time and circumstance threaten to erase those efforts from memory. Standing at the edge of the empire's ruins, one feels a profound connection to those who came before. The stones, inscriptions, and symbols are more than relics. They are voices, speaking across centuries, urging modern observers to consider the fleeting nature of power, the persistence of culture, and the resilience of human imagination. The Dragon Empire, though long vanished, continues to resonate in these echoes, compelling us to explore, to question, and to marvel at what humans are capable of achieving. In contemplating its rise and fall, we are reminded that the boundaries of history are porous. What seems lost may still influence the present. What appears forgotten may shape future generations. And in the silent testimonies of the Dragon Empire, we find not only a cautionary tale but also a source of inspiration. The realization that even in impermanence, there is meaning, and even in silence, there is voice. The shadows of the empire stretch across centuries, lingering in places where the earth itself seems to remember the lives that once thrived upon it. Even as we trace the ruins of walls and scattered artifacts, there is a sense that something larger remains just beyond perception. A hidden pulse beneath stone and soil, a rhythm of human ambition that refuses to be silenced. The people of the empire were not merely rulers or soldiers. They were visionaries, artisans, scholars, and dreamers bound together by a shared belief in a world that could be ordered, harmonized, and elevated. Their lives were interwoven with the fabric of the empire, their destinies inseparable from the monuments, rituals, and secret chambers they created. Archaeologists have often puzzled over the seemingly deliberate dispersal of the empire's cultural artifacts. Temples, administrative centers, and even homes appear in clusters that defy conventional logic, scattered over hundreds of miles in ways that suggest more than mere geography dictated their placement. The deliberate positioning hints at a sophisticated understanding of social networks, communication lines, and symbolic geography. Certain temples align with celestial events, and certain roadways mirror the patterns of rivers and mountain passes, suggesting that the architects of the civilization were attempting to integrate human activity with the natural and cosmic order. Every stone placed, every artifact created, every ritual performed was part of a broader design. A design whose full purpose is still only partially glimpsed. The empire's artifacts tell stories that written records cannot. A bronze seal discovered deep within a cave depicts a dragon coiled around an orb, its claws poised in a gesture both protective and commanding. Scholars initially thought it was purely ceremonial, a symbol of divine power, but close analysis reveals markings resembling a primitive language, a proto-script intended to communicate instructions to those trained to read it. A jade figurine from another site shows a human figure suspended in what appears to be a ritualistic stance, flanked by serpentine creatures with wings that suggest the mystical or supernatural. These objects, painstakingly crafted, were clearly more than decorative. They were functional in ways we have yet to fully comprehend. Perhaps they were tools for governance, keys to secret rites, or objects designed to influence thought and behavior on a societal scale. The scattered manuscripts recovered from hidden libraries offer glimpses of how knowledge was organized and protected. Written in a combination of pictographs and coded symbols, they describe complex rituals, administrative procedures, astronomical observations, and philosophical teachings. One fragment discusses the alignment of the guardians, a ceremony intended to synchronize communities with the movements of the stars. Another mentions the Council of Shadows, a group tasked with overseeing the preservation of secrets, ensuring that critical knowledge was only accessible to those deemed worthy. These manuscripts suggest that the empire was governed not only through politics and force but also through careful orchestration of belief, perception, and ritualized authority. Oral traditions preserved in remote mountain villages reinforce this understanding. Tales of the empire often include dragons, not as literal creatures but as symbols of authority, wisdom, and danger. Elders recount stories of emissaries traveling vast distances, bearing messages encoded in symbols only interpretable by those initiated into the secret knowledge of the empire. Some accounts speak of underground chambers where decisions were made and judgments rendered, places hidden so thoroughly that even people living nearby claimed never to have known they existed. These narratives, often dismissed as folklore, now seem to carry kernels of truth, reflecting a civilization that deliberately layered fact and myth to maintain control, inspire awe, and preserve its vision beyond the lifespan of any single ruler. The empire's human dimension is equally compelling. Ordinary citizens, laborers, and artisans were integral to the system, their lives shaped by the grand ambitions of those at the top. The scale of construction projects suggests coordinated effort on a level previously thought impossible for the era. Roads, irrigation systems, temples, and fortifications required not only labor but a complex organizational structure capable of motivating, instructing, and sustaining thousands of people over decades. Letters and personal inscriptions discovered on shards of pottery reveal individuals' pride, fear, and devotion, offering a rare emotional glimpse into the lives behind the grand designs. In these small voices, we hear ambition, obedience, dissent, and hope, reminders that even in the shadow of monumental power, human emotion drives the machinery of civilization. Yet the empire was not invulnerable. Its rise, rapid and unprecedented, sowed the seeds of vulnerability. Centralized authority depended on the cohesion of far-flung communities, many of which had previously operated independently or under local chieftains. Attempts to unify these populations through a combination of ritual, symbolism, and law were successful for a time, but tensions inevitably grew. Archaeological evidence points to unrest. Burned settlements, defensive fortifications hastily erected, and weapons buried in secret caches. These remnants suggest periods of rebellion, highlighting the delicate balance between control and coercion, between inspiration and fear. Even the most sophisticated systems cannot fully contain the unpredictable force of human desire for autonomy. Environmental factors also played a decisive role in the empire's decline. Sediment analysis from rivers and lakes indicates significant climatic changes during the empire's peak, droughts, floods, and shifts in seasonal patterns that would have disrupted agriculture, trade, and transportation. Crops failed, livestock perished, and famine became a recurring threat. These pressures compounded internal tensions, weakening the empire's ability to maintain its social and political structures. In this way, the empire's fall was not a single catastrophic event but a cascade of pressures, each one amplifying the next, leading to a gradual unraveling that left entire communities abandoned or destroyed. Yet, even as the physical empire crumbled, its influence persisted. Cultural diffusion occurred subtly, carried forward by survivors, neighboring societies, and oral traditions. The symbols, rituals, and philosophical principles of the Dragon Empire seeped into later dynasties, shaping governance, architecture, and belief systems long after its disappearance. The dragon, once the emblem of this secretive power, was adopted by subsequent rulers as a symbol of authority, wisdom, and protection. This appropriation of imagery underscores how powerful ideas can outlast their creators, persisting even when the structures that house them vanish. Artifacts also reveal attempts to manipulate perception and memory intentionally. Many objects were deliberately placed in locations that created the illusion of permanence or divine intervention. Temples were aligned with celestial events to convey the impression that rulers commanded cosmic authority. Roads and bridges were constructed to channel travelers along specific routes, ensuring that encounters with imperial symbols were unavoidable. Even burial practices reflect careful consideration of legacy, with certain tombs positioned to be visible from distant vantage points, creating the illusion that the empire's power extended farther than it truly did. These strategies demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of psychology, suggesting that the empire's architects were as concerned with controlling memory and belief as they were with wielding political or military power. The spiritual dimension of the empire is equally complex. Religious practices were intertwined with governance, designed to reinforce authority and unify communities under shared rituals and symbols. Priests, scholars, and advisors held positions of significant influence, responsible for interpreting signs, performing ceremonies, and maintaining sacred knowledge. Certain rituals appear to have been exclusive, accessible only to those deemed worthy or loyal, reinforcing social hierarchies and ensuring compliance. Yet, they also provided communities with a sense of purpose and connection, a shared narrative that bound individuals together even amidst chaos. This blending of governance and spirituality highlights the empire's ambition to orchestrate not only material but also psychological and cultural cohesion. The empire's collapse, when it came, was both physical and symbolic. Settlements were abandoned, treasures buried or lost, and manuscripts destroyed or scattered. But even in absence, the empire left traces that challenge our understanding of history. Artifacts, oral traditions, and subtle cultural influences act as whispers from the past, urging modern observers to reconsider assumptions about social organization, statecraft, and human ingenuity. The Dragon Empire's story reminds us that the past is not merely a record of events, but a living tapestry, interwoven with human emotion, ambition, and creativity, and that even when structures vanish, ideas endure. What remains is a haunting lesson about the interplay between ambition, environment, human will, and legacy. The empire sought to control both the tangible and intangible, manipulating land, labor, belief, and memory to create a civilization that was greater than the sum of its parts. Its failure illustrates that even the most visionary projects are vulnerable to forces beyond comprehension: natural disasters, human descent, and the inevitable erosion of time. And yet, in the fragments that remain, in the whispers that persist, we glimpse the brilliance of a society that dared to dream beyond conventional limits, leaving a legacy that continues to challenge and inspire. In contemplating the empire, one cannot ignore the emotional resonance of its story. There is awe in its ambition, tragedy in its fall, and fascination in its persistence. Each artifact, each ruin, each fragmentary manuscript is a testament not just to the civilization's ingenuity, but to the human spirit that created it. In this sense, the Dragon Empire survives not only as a historical curiosity but as a profound reflection on the nature of ambition, power, and human imagination. Its echoes are a reminder that even in silence, history speaks, and that even in absence, legacy endures. Finally, the scattered remnants of the empire invite reflection on the impermanence of human achievements and the resilience of ideas. Cities may crumble, texts may decay, and rulers may be forgotten, but the underlying vision, the principles, symbols, and philosophies, can outlast physical structures. The dragon, once a symbol of the empire's authority, continues to inspire, reminding us that civilization is not merely a matter of walls and armies, but of imagination, belief, and the stories we carry forward. The Dragon Empire, though physically gone, still lives in these echoes, challenging us to seek, to question, and to marvel at what humanity can create and what time cannot entirely erase. At the edge of the world's memory, where history frays into myth and myth dissolves into silence, the scattered pieces of the Dragon Empire finally begin to align. For centuries, its story had remained locked inside forgotten chambers, buried beneath dynastic propaganda, swallowed by shifting sands and the slow decay of time. But now, after chasing fractured whispers across mountains, deserts, and archives, a clearer picture begins to emerge, one stitched together from artifacts, scroll fragments, geological scars, and the lingering echo of human ambition. The revelation does not come in a single moment. It isn't a dramatic unveiling in a grand hall or the triumphant discovery of a pristine text. Instead, it takes shape gradually, like an image appearing on a fogged mirror, becoming clearer only as contradictions dissolve and long-ignored evidence finds its rightful place. It is the culmination of countless hours of research, excavation, deciphering, reinterpreting, and questioning assumptions that had stood for centuries. And as each piece clicks into place, an uncomfortable truth becomes impossible to ignore. The Dragon Empire may not have survived in physical form, but its memory, its idea, was far more resilient than anyone imagined. The first thread emerges from the oldest surviving remnants, the warped bronze tablets recovered in the desert dig. At first, scholars dismissed them as ceremonial objects, too damaged to hold meaningful information. But deep etching patterns, almost invisible until scanned with modern imaging, reveal a hidden language system. Not quite Proto-Chinese, not quite any known script, but something in between, an experimental transitional form. This alone changes everything. It means someone, somewhere, was trying to codify a unified written system earlier than previously believed. And the tablet's recurring symbol, a dragon spiraling around a mountain, matches the same emblem found carved into jade talismans retrieved from a collapsed cliffside shrine nearly 800 miles away. The distance between these sites is staggering. No minor tribe could have maintained influence over so vast a stretch of land. There must have been organization, communication, and governance, however short-lived. The idea of a centralized authority, even an experimental one, suddenly becomes plausible. The next thread lies in the scroll fragments discovered in a damp mountain archive, sealed behind wooden beams that had somehow survived multiple dynastic purges. These fragments, fragile enough to crumble at a touch, are written in a blend of ritual poetry and administrative record-keeping. They speak of a council of 3, scholar kings or perhaps warlord philosophers, who attempted something radical, unifying fractured tribes under a single banner not through conquest alone, but through a shared cultural identity. They envisioned a society built on astronomical cycles, agricultural innovation, and ritual harmony. Their chosen symbol, the dragon, not as a creature of dominance, but as a guardian of equilibrium. According to these fragments, the council's ambition was breathtaking. They sought to create an empire that would bind heaven and earth, aligning human governance with celestial motion. Their rituals, their laws, even their architecture, were designed to mimic star patterns. If true, this would make the Dragon Empire one of the earliest known attempts to unify spirituality, science, and statecraft. Yet ambition has always been a double-edged sword. A crucial piece of this puzzle comes from the oral traditions of isolated mountain clans, stories long dismissed as superstitions. Elders speak of an age when the dragon's breath brought order, but the mountain's wrath swallowed it whole. Geological surveys now reveal that the region experienced a catastrophic seismic event around the same century the scrolls are dated to. Entire settlements may have simply vanished. Rivers changed course. Farmland turned to dust. In such chaos, even the most organized state could collapse overnight. And yet, the idea of the Dragon Empire persisted, scattered like glowing embers, carried in symbolic rituals, preserved in folk songs, and reinterpreted by later dynasties who adopted the dragon as their emblem. The empire's physical form died. Its ideology survived. The human stories add the final, intimate layer to the revelation. Accounts found in personal diaries, rare, precious heirlooms, belong to ordinary individuals caught in those turbulent years. One diary from a wandering metalworker describes forging ceremonial blades etched with the dragon motif for the rulers who would unite the valleys. Another entry from a trader details traveling through newly connected road networks, marveling that different tribes were using the same standardized measures for the first time. A young musician's final poem laments the destruction of the Great Hall of Stars, a structure never found but repeatedly referenced in unrelated sources. Different voices, different regions, one shared memory. When those first-hand accounts are laid beside the archaeological evidence, the conclusion becomes difficult to refute. The Dragon Empire wasn't a myth invented by storytellers. It was real, brief, bold, and perhaps doomed by nature or political betrayal, but undeniably real. It existed long enough to leave a faint but consistent imprint, and its fall was forceful enough to scatter its traces across regions and centuries, like a broken comet strewn across the night sky. But why would such an empire vanish so completely from mainstream history? The answer, unsettling yet familiar, lies in the motives of those who followed. Later dynasties had little interest in preserving the legacy of a predecessor whose ideas conflicted with their own claims to divine authority. The Dragon Empire's experiment, a meritocratic council rather than a single ruler, a symbolic unity rather than hereditary lineage, was a threat to the ideological foundations of traditional monarchy. Erasing it wasn't just convenient, it was strategically necessary. And so, centuries of rewriting, burning, repurposing sacred sites, and reframing symbols gradually buried the empire beneath layers of official narrative. But some truths refused to die. Artifacts preserved in secret family holdings, inscriptions hidden within remote temples, fragments tucked inside tomb chambers, even the small, seemingly insignificant tokens carried by nomadic tribes, all resisted erasure. Through them, the empire whispered across time, waiting for the right moment to be heard again. The final reconstruction of the Dragon Empire is not a perfect mosaic. Gaps remain, large ones. Some events are shadows. Some figures remain nameless. But the pattern is compelling, its core unmistakable. It was a state born from visionary ambition, built by leaders who believed the world could be ordered through harmony rather than domination. A state that dared to experiment with governance. A state that valued knowledge, astronomy, and cross-regional connection at a time when such ideas were revolutionary. Its fall, though tragic, was not meaningless. It sparked cultural aftershocks that influenced later dynasties more deeply than they ever admitted. Architectural styles, ritual structures, astronomical practices, and even political doctrines bear faint marks of its legacy, embedded so subtly that most never realized their origin. And so, the final revelation is not a single discovery, but a truth assembled from countless fragments. The Dragon Empire existed. It rose swiftly. It sought to reshape the world. And though it fell into silence, it never truly disappeared. Standing at the end of this journey, we glimpsed a world that history tried to forget. A world that challenges the linear narratives taught for centuries. A world that reminds us that even the grandest civilizations can fade, and even the most suppressed truths can someday return to the surface. And the question that lingers, hauntingly, is this. If an empire so bold, so ambitious, so symbolically powerful could vanish almost without trace, then what else lies hidden beneath the layers of time? What histories remain buried beneath ruins, beneath rewritten chronicles, beneath the very ground we walk upon? In that uncertainty lies both mystery and promise. Because every forgotten story, every suppressed truth, every shattered empire leaves echoes, waiting patiently for someone curious enough, determined enough, and daring enough to listen. And now, at last, after piecing together the scattered remnants, we hear those echoes clearly. The Dragon Empire speaks again. A final whisper carried across millennia. Remember us. We were here, and our dreams shaped the world more than you know. Echoes of forgotten power ripple through every corner of human history, lingering in the shadows where memory fades and ambition once burned bright. When we speak of a lost empire, we often imagine something distant and mythic. Ruins swallowed by the earth, names eroded into dust, achievements dissolved into silence. But the truth is more unsettling. An empire does not vanish because it is small or insignificant. It vanishes because time is ruthless, human memory is fragile, and the world keeps moving whether its greatest triumphs are remembered or buried. As we stand at the end of this journey, examining the fragments of a civilization that once commanded awe and fear, the question becomes not just how they disappeared, but what their disappearance reveals about us, about the human mind, about the things we choose to remember, and the things we allow to disappear. There is something deeply haunting about realizing that millions of lives, centuries of culture, entire systems of belief and rule can dissolve until they exist only as faint whispers. When we reconstruct their story, piece by piece, we're not just studying broken walls or deciphering half-legible inscriptions. We're wrestling with a ghost. Every artifact is someone's memory that somehow survived the flood of time. Every stone foundation is a voice trying to speak across millennia. And yet, most voices never make it across. Most are lost, drowned in wars, famines, natural decay, and, perhaps most powerfully, the shifting priorities of the living. Empires cannot defend themselves against the forgetfulness of those who come after them. No army can conquer oblivion. When we step back and analyze what drove this lost empire to rise so rapidly, it is impossible to avoid one theme: ambition. Ambition fueled their expansion, their architecture, their innovations, their wars. It is a force that has shaped every great power in human history. But ambition is a double-edged sword. The same hunger that builds wonders can also blind leaders to their limits. The same fire that pushes a people to transcend their boundaries can consume them when left unchecked. This empire chased greatness with a ferocity that astonished its neighbors. They believed deeply that their destiny was bigger than any one lifetime, that they had been chosen, by God's fate or sheer will, to leave a mark on the world. And in many ways they succeeded. Their cities towered over the landscape. Their influence stretched farther than anyone expected. Their symbols carried meaning across continents. But ambition alone cannot guarantee survival. When that ambition becomes obsession, when expansion becomes more important than sustainability, when the image of greatness overshadows the foundations required to support it, empires begin to crack from within. The people who built this lost power were not foolish or careless, they were human. And humans, with all their brilliance, create structures just as fragile as themselves. They misjudge threats. They underestimate the passage of time. They cling to systems long after they stop functioning. They believe their world is stable, simply because it has always been so in their memory. They assume their monuments will stand forever, unaware that the earth has other plans. One of the most sobering lessons from studying this vanished empire is how small the gap can be between permanence and oblivion. A single drought, a shift in trade routes, a new invader appearing at the wrong time, a succession crisis that spirals out of control. History loves to present collapse as something dramatic and cinematic, but more often it is disappointingly mundane. Systems become brittle. Leaders become divided. Ordinary people grow tired. The glue that holds everything together dries out and cracks. And when the collapse finally comes, the world rarely pauses to notice. The empire falls, the survivors scatter, and generations later all that remains are ruins that spark curiosity, legends that exaggerate the truth, and mystery scholars still struggle to decode. But perhaps the most profound layer of this reflection is the realization that human memory, what we choose to preserve, shapes history far more than historians ever can. This empire vanished not only because it physically declined, but because the civilizations that came after it chose not to carry its identity forward. They absorbed its people, repurposed its buildings, reinterpreted its symbols, and rewrote its story in ways that suited their own needs. To be forgotten is not simply to fall. It is to be overwritten. It is to have your narrative scattered so widely that future generations cannot recognize it as belonging to a single civilization at all. In that sense, the greatest enemy of an empire is not destruction, it is indifference. And yet, there is something undeniably inspiring about rediscovering a lost power whose presence once shaped entire regions. When we uncover a forgotten empire, we are reminded that history is never complete. There are always missing chapters, buried truths, and civilizations that contributed more to humanity than anyone realized. The fact that a society can vanish so thoroughly that its rediscovery becomes an archaeological revelation tells us something critical. The world is still full of unanswered questions. The past is not a closed book. It is a labyrinth with hidden chambers, secret passages, and doors we haven't yet learned to open. This rediscovery also forces us to confront our own place in the grand timeline of humanity. If an empire mighty enough to influence its era could disappear without a trace, what does that say about the permanence of modern powers? What does that say about the certainty we place in our institutions, our technologies, our stories? We often assume that we live in a time too advanced to be forgotten. But every empire has thought the same. The people who once ruled this forgotten realm likely believed their achievements would echo for eternity. They could not imagine a future in which their existence became obscure, their language undeciphered, their ideas attributed to others. They could not imagine themselves becoming just another mystery in a museum. This lost empire teaches us that greatness does not guarantee remembrance. Only constant effort, documentation, cultural transmission, and global connection can preserve a legacy. It reminds us that civilizations are delicate ecosystems, dependent on balance, adaptability, and humility. It warns us that no matter how far we progress, the forces of nature, time, and human forgetfulness are always stronger. But it also inspires us to continue searching, to continue uncovering truths hidden beneath soil, sand, and seawater. Because with every discovery, we restore a voice that was nearly silenced. We give the past a second chance to speak. Perhaps the most haunting realization is that this empire's disappearance is not an anomaly. It is the norm. Countless civilizations have risen and fallen without leaving a name behind. Countless innovations, languages, religions, myths, and philosophies have flickered into existence and then extinguished before history began recording such things. For every empire we remember, there may be dozens we have yet to find. Their ruins lie untouched. Their scripts remain unread. Their rulers' names have never been spoken in the modern world. And that truth is both terrifying and exhilarating. As we conclude this exploration, one question lingers like a cold breath in the air. If an empire can vanish completely from memory, if it can be erased so thoroughly that even its most powerful leaders become shadows, what else lies hidden? What kingdoms are still sleeping beneath jungles, deserts, oceans? What stories are waiting patiently for the right discovery, the right technology, the right spark of curiosity to bring them back into the light? The past is far larger than the sliver we know. And in that vast, uncharted depth, anything could be waiting. In the echoes of this forgotten power, we hear not just the story of a lost empire, but the story of human ambition. Its beauty, its danger, its fleeting nature. We hear the story of memory, its fragility, its biases, its tendency to preserve what is convenient and discard what is not. And we hear the story of obsession. The same obsession that drove this empire to greatness now drives us to uncover their secrets. In a sense, we are connected across centuries by the same restless curiosity. They built. We search. They tried to be remembered. We try to remember. And maybe that is the final lesson they offer us. Empires fall. People fade. Monuments crumble. But as long as someone, somewhere, continues to ask questions, nothing is ever truly lost. Some echoes are faint, but they never disappear completely. They wait in the silence, in the soil, in the forgotten corners of the world, waiting for discovery, waiting for recognition, waiting for someone to listen. If an entire empire can vanish from history, then what else lies hidden, just beyond our understanding, waiting for the moment we finally uncover it? The final chapter of this journey begins not in the ruins of the empire, nor in the cracked libraries filled with forgotten scripts, but in the quiet space where history dissolves into myth, where facts blur into echoes, and where the imagination is left alone to walk among the shadows of a world that once dared to reshape the possible. As we close the scroll on the Dragon Empire, what remains is not merely the memory of a vanished civilization, but the haunting awareness that something extraordinary once existed, something vast, meticulously designed, and deeply misunderstood. For while its structures have crumbled, its secrets endure in the silence that follows. The Dragon Empire was many things: a geopolitical experiment, a mystical organism, a fortress of knowledge, and a living mythology crafted by human ambition. And yet, as we reach the end of its story, we realize the truth. It was also a mirror reflecting the brightest brilliance of the human spirit and the darkest recesses of human desire. For every ritual that united communities, there was a shadowed council manipulating truths. For every invention that advanced science, a secret was buried to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. For every dragon symbol carved into stone to inspire hope, another was etched in warning. To understand the empire's true legacy, we must accept that no single narrative can contain it. The empire was a multi-layered world where politics, spirituality, knowledge, and myth intertwined in ways that defy neat categorization. It was a civilization structured like a labyrinth, one that reveals itself only in fragments, fleeting moments, and half-buried truths. And perhaps that is the most profound revelation. The empire was intentionally built to be remembered in pieces. Its architects knew that permanence is an illusion, that power is fragile, and that secrets must often be preserved by dispersing them across time rather than locking them away. The story of its disappearance, then, is not simply one of collapse. It is one of intentional silence. The empire understood something few civilizations dared to acknowledge: that secrecy can be a strategy for survival even after the physical structure disappears. To dissolve without leaving a complete record was a final act of control, a final gesture of mastery over destiny. And yet, in that silence, they overlooked one truth. Silence often speaks louder than words. Silence is an invitation. Silence is a challenge. Silence is a doorway left ajar for future generations to peer through, wondering what lies in the darkness beyond. As we sift through the remaining fragments, the cracked dragon seals, the broken jade tablets, the brittle scrolls inked with fading symbols, a pattern emerges. The fragments do not simply document rituals or governance. They describe a worldview in which knowledge was not merely a tool, but a force, something with weight, power, and danger, something that had to be guided, protected, and sometimes suppressed. They believed knowledge could elevate humanity, but if misused, could also tear it apart. Their empire was built on the razor's edge between revelation and secrecy, and this delicate balance was both their strength and their downfall. Imagine the empire at its height. Sprawling academies where scholars debated the nature of the cosmos. Vast chambers where strategists mapped not only territory but the psychology of neighboring realms. Underground sanctuaries where rituals aligned with celestial patterns in an effort to merge human intention with the forces of nature. The empire was a living experiment in harmonizing the physical and metaphysical. A bold attempt to unify human intellect, spiritual discipline, and empirical observation. That such a civilization existed at all challenges our assumptions about ancient history. That it disappeared so completely challenges our assumptions about the durability of human achievement. But disappearance is not erasure. As travelers, historians, and storytellers wander through mountains, deserts, and long-forgotten cities, they stumble upon remnants that refuse to yield their secrets easily. A half-buried mosaic depicting a dragon with its wings folded. A stone tablet with symbols that match no known writing system. An underground tunnel aligned with constellations that should not have been mapped with such precision. These discoveries are sparks, tiny points of light that illuminate the silhouette of a forgotten empire. They remind us that history, even when silent, never truly stops speaking. It whispers, it hints, it beckons. Of all the symbols the empire left behind, none is more profound than the dragon. To modern eyes, dragons are mythological creatures, embodiments of imagination rather than fact. But to the empire, the dragon was a synthesis of metaphor and power. It represented not only strength and wisdom, but balance between chaos and order, secrecy and revelation, destruction and creation. In the empire's belief system, dragons were not merely beasts or deities. They were embodiments of forces that shape civilizations. Forces that must be understood, respected, and controlled. As researchers delved deeper into Ötzi's final hours, a new layer of his story emerged. One built not on artifacts, but on movement. His path across the Alps was not random. Every step he took, every elevation he climbed, carried meaning. Scientists reconstructed his last journey through pollen traces, mineral particles, and microscopic plant fragments embedded in his clothing and digestive system. These fragments revealed that in just 48 hours, Ötzi descended into a valley, ate a full meal, and then climbed thousands of feet back up into the mountains. It was a path taken with urgency rather than routine. Something or someone was following him. His last meal, a carefully prepared combination of ibex meat, grains, and herbs, was not the meal of a man casually traveling. It had been eaten quickly, yet deliberately, as if he knew strength would be needed for what lay ahead. The terrain he crossed grew harsher with each hour. Sharp winds, thinning air, and steep rock paths surrounded him. Yet he kept going, driven by purpose or fear, perhaps both. The microscopic evidence painted a vivid picture. He paused briefly near a forest, then climbed again toward the glacier where he would ultimately fall. His final journey becomes even more haunting when paired with the weapons found beside him. He carried a nearly finished bow, still rough at the edges, as if crafted in a hurry. His copper axe, a symbol of status, remained tightly bound to him, suggesting he expected danger. Section 23 captures the image of a man on the run, climbing higher into unforgiving mountains, unaware that the ice beneath his feet would become his tomb, and his voice to the future. The wounds on Ötzi's body were not random marks of nature. They were the silent confessions of his final conflict. Forensic scans revealed deep cuts on his hands and wrists, the kind of injuries seen when someone raises their arms to block a blade. These defensive wounds suggested a struggle, perhaps a close-range fight shortly before his death. More damning was the arrowhead lodged in his left shoulder. Fired from behind, it tore through muscle and pierced a major artery. This was not a warning shot. It was a killing strike. Yet the arrow shaft had been removed, indicating the attacker, or maybe even Ötzi himself, tried to pull it out. Blood traces from multiple individuals were found on his weapons. This astonishing detail revealed he had not been alone in the hours leading to his death. There was combat, real combat, before the fatal shot. Whether he was ambushed, betrayed, or defending his people remains a mystery, but everything points to a violent confrontation. Near his body lay a copper axe, astonishingly well-crafted and rare for his era. Many researchers believe this axe may have been the reason he was targeted. In a world where status meant survival, such an item could spark envy, conflict, or even revenge. His unfinished bow tells its own story. A man preparing for danger. A man expecting enemies. A man who knew time was running out. Section 24 paints a chilling picture. Ötzi did not freeze to death by accident. He died violently, hunted, wounded, and pursued into the mountains. The glacier preserved his wounds better than any parchment or carving, allowing us to see not just how he lived, but how he fought for his life. As the mystery of Ötzi's death takes shape, Section 25 shifts from evidence to meaning, from what happened to why it matters. His body, preserved for over 5,000 years, is more than an archaeological discovery. It is a message from the depths of time, a reminder of humanity's unbroken continuity. Ötzi lived in a world without metal tools, maps, shelters, or written language, yet his struggles mirror ours. He sought safety. He protected his belongings. He faced danger. He tried to survive. His final journey becomes a symbol of the human experience. Resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The glacier that entombed him acted not as a grave, but as a time capsule. Every stitch in his clothing, every tool he carried, every wound on his body speaks across millennia. Through him, we see the fragility of life and the astonishing ability of nature to preserve a story when humans cannot. Ötzi's legacy is not just scientific. It is emotional, philosophical. He forces us to ask enduring questions. What do we leave behind? What stories survive when we are gone? How will future generations interpret our lives, our tools, our struggles? His death, once silent, now echoes through museums, documentaries, and research labs. His life, once unknown, now shapes our understanding of ancient societies, technologies, diets, migrations, and conflicts. Whether dragons truly existed in any physical sense is a mystery we cannot solve. But what is clear is that the empire believed in them deeply and built institutions, rituals, and philosophies around their symbolism. As we reach the final pages of this documentary, one question lingers. Did the empire truly vanish, or did it transform? Is it possible that remnants of its knowledge live on in subtle ways, embedded in philosophies, in rituals carried forward by remote communities, or in the structural designs of later dynasties? Some scholars argue that echoes of the empire appear in the sudden leaps of scientific and architectural brilliance in later Chinese history. Others believe its ideas survived in the form of esoteric traditions, passed secretly from master to disciple across centuries. If this is true, then the empire did not collapse. It dissolved into influence, becoming a hidden current shaping the river of history. But perhaps the most haunting possibility is the simplest one. The empire was never meant to be fully understood. It was meant to be questioned. It was meant to exist at the boundary between history and myth, knowledge and imagination. It was meant to provoke curiosity, inspire awe, and challenge assumptions. Its legacy is not a set of facts, but a field of possibilities. Its brilliance lies not only in what it created but in what it left intentionally unsaid. And so, as we step away from the ruins and manuscripts and let the dust settle, we find ourselves confronting the deeper lesson the empire offers. That human civilization is not defined solely by what it builds, but by the mysteries it leaves behind. The empire teaches us that not all knowledge needs to be complete, not all stories need closure, and not all truths need to be uncovered. Some truths are powerful precisely because they remain elusive, suspended between revelation and shadow. Standing at the crossroads of fact and myth, we are invited to reflect not only on the empire's journey but on our own. What dragons do we pursue? What secrets do we guard? What ambitions do we chase into the unknown? The empire's story is a metaphor for the human condition, our endless quest for mastery, meaning, and transcendence. And like the empire, we too must confront the fragile boundary between brilliance and fallibility, between creation and destruction. As the final echoes fade, one image remains. A dragon carved in stone, wings unfurled, eyes fixed not on the past but on the horizon. A symbol of what was, what might have been, and what still might be. A reminder that history is not a closed book, but a living labyrinth, filled with doorways waiting for those curious enough to open them. And in that final image, we find our last message from the empire. Seek, wonder, question, for the extraordinary is never truly lost. It merely waits in silence for those who dare to look for it.